Hey everybody, welcome to the Growing with Fishes podcast. We have a pretty cool group of guests this week. How's everybody doing? We got Roger as always.
How y'all doing?
We got Mr. Green Jeans.
Hey.
Marty wasn't able. He should be able with us a little later. He's got family aggro, and then we got Scott with us. And then we got Eric. Marty wasn't able. He should be able with us a little later. Kevin, or Josh? I'm sorry. How's it going?
Good, man. How's it going?
And then we got Scott with us. Going? Oh, it's Roger. And then we got Eric. I'm going to mute Roger. There we go. There's the echo.
Every time I hang out with Eric, he doses me. It's just looping right now, right?
Yeah, that was me reaching through.
Right.
Things are getting weird already.
So why don't you guys tell us what you guys do? We'll start off with Scott. I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're about.
Yeah, my name is Scott, Scottola Granola on social media. My business is Crescent Soil Services, and we use a microscope to analyze soil biology. So we provide a lot of data for commercial facilities, things like that. And I like to start trouble on the internet, because it's fun.
All right. And what about you, Eric? Why don't you tell us about yourself and what you're about?
My name's Eric. I'm with Forever Flowering Greenhouses. I started with the company in 2007, and I've been managing ever since. We pioneered the light deprivation technique for the commercial side of it, I guess you could say. We didn't invent light deprivation. We just made it available for people to access it easily without having to figure it out on their own. I'm a fourth generation farmer, so my family's been farming since 1862, and so I have a passion for agriculture. And even though I'm in greenhouses, I seem to be dealing a lot with all sides of the growing, I guess you could say, since I've been around it so long, and we're trying to get people educated and whatnot. I've even taken aquaponics classes over the last couple of years as well to gather more knowledge. So yeah, and I work with Scott a lot. He's great on the biology. He's taught me a lot about underground because all I've paid attention to is above ground. So it's good to stick my head under the ground once in a while and see what's doing.
Awesome. Where did you take your aquaponic classes at?
They threw one in the Bay Area. It was put on by Murray Hallam, the Australian guy that does the backyard aquaponics. And he put it on with a group of people, and it was like a 4-day course. And we went out to a greenhouse and to an aquaponics farm and all kinds of stuff. And so it was definitely interesting.
I was at Ouroboros in the Bay Area, I think.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah. So they're part of the company that I'm doing now with Purity.
Which part?
They're
the Ouroboros farm.
Yeah, they're part owners.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, that was. I mean, I think they were just getting going at the time, so it was all kind of in its infancy and whatnot. And so the class, I mean, like I said, I was new to aquaponics, so everything that I was taught was fresh material for the most part. So I learned a lot.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they have a bigger facility now, a little bit farther down the street, and yeah, come check it out again sometime.
I will. Some of the things that I learned or that I speak about even in my presentations now are some of the things that I noticed at Ouroboros Farms, actually, with pest and how the plants act in the sun and things like that. So, I mean, we can go into that later or whatever, but yeah, I learned some things that they didn't really teach me there, but I definitely learned there that I can take with me other places as well.
What about you, Josh?
Yeah, I'm Joshua Rutherford. I'm I guess a commercial grower. Kind of feels weird to say that. because I'm just a one-man operation, but I do have a commercial license here in Washington. And yeah, I've just been searching out how to grow organically. I've grown aquaponically for a long time. Before I was doing cannabis, I did veggies aquaponically. And then since I got back into commercial cannabis, I switched back into a living soil method. It was just easier for me for the way I choose to cultivate. Do a lot of kind of sea green style where I plant a lot of small plants and just plug them in and let them go, rather than doing the potting thing. And so, yeah, Dutch Blooms is my farm, and I'm up here in Washington, right by Canada, and got inspired. Like I said, was saying before we went online, I met Leighton on the show about 6 months ago, and he does Kingdom Aquaponics. And he sells biology, essentially, shelf-stable biology, instant compost teas and fulvic acids type stuff. And as we were just getting to know each other, it was just kind of becoming really clear that there was a disconnect between a lot of growers and some of the soil food web guys who were kind of pushing biology. Can you hear that? My son's knocking the table. So it was kind of like the reason we decided to do this, to kind of push towards this conference, was to get some conversations going. And, honestly, I was inspired by what Eric and Scott were doing in California, watching that stuff with Elaine I think I was seeing some stuff last spring-ish, and just kind of want to do something similar. And so it's been real cool. It's a cool group of people have come together, and I guess that's why we're on the podcast today, is just to pre-start that conversation, Yeah.
Awesome. So you're putting together this conference at the end of the month. Why don't you tell people about that?
Yeah. My wife just showed up, so I'm going to step out. But it's in Portland, Oregon, 26th through 27th of January. And Eric and Scott are going to be there, and they're actually going to do a couple sessions themselves, and then they're going to host a Saturday night group talk, which I'm really excited about to have that going on. And I think that's going to be some of the highlights of the event, quite honestly. It's just the free flow, meeting with the speakers and being able to interact with them. And so, yeah, we've got, kind of starting the thing off from, beginning to end. Jeff Lowenfels is going to be there, and he's going to kind of talk basic soil food web. And then we're going to kind of escalate up from there. And, I've kind of been telling people it's an intermediate to advanced, organics kind of conference. It's, Jeff Lowenfels is going to open us up with some basic soil food web type stuff. And then we're going to get into mycology, entomology, my PM stuff with Suzanne Wainwright. She is super interesting. And Dr. Efren Kazar I can't say it right. He's a mycologist. And Robert Faust, actually, who does BioAg. Most people know him. Full Power is one of the products he sells. It's a fulvic acid, and he's got some really interesting stuff to talk about. He was on Sunday night. He's going to introduce a new cloning method that he's got. I don't know anything about it. Just that he's got some new cloning method that he's copyrighted, and he's going to introduce it. And yeah, so I'm just really excited. I think it's going to be a good opportunity to hear from some strong heads and have some good conversations between growers and scientists.
Awesome. Yeah, I look forward to talking. When is it, and how do people find tickets, and how much is it, and
so it's January 26th through 28th in Northeast Portland at the Village Ballroom. I've got an Eventbrite up, and let's see if I can walk in here, my BrayneGro room. I have an Eventbrite up, and then you can link to that off my IG, which is Dutch Blooms. And then I also have a website set up that is Regenerative Cannabis.com. And that'll link to that. And it's $125 a day or $400 for 4 days. And, we're going to do 4 sessions a day with an evening session. It's, like I was saying, kind of more loose hangout, interact with speakers, Some of it will be a little bit led, but really just interactive.
Awesome. It sounds like a really good time. So, Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit more about soil biology and kind of maybe a little bit more in depth about what you do and kind of what your specialties are, and maybe some stuff out there people haven't we have a lot of we cover a lot of not just aquaponics but also permaculture and regenerative and uh, cannabis and vegetable production in general.
Please reintroduce yourself too, Scott, because when it started off, I'm hearing a loop going behind everybody. We've been trying to address it, but I didn't hear any of your intro earlier. So if you could please do that before you get where Steve wanted you, I'd like to know who you are, and so would everybody else.
You didn't really miss anything. It was a pretty whack introduction, so hopefully it just looped awkwardly. That is distracting as hell, I'll be honest. You guys that do this every week with composure, it's impressive. It's quite distracting to see all kinds of media going on.
Is there still a loop? I think we got it.
No, I think we're good. If we get Roger to mute, then it stops.
Nope, I was muted the whole time. It's been going on.
Perfect.
I'm hearing three different voices, two in the background and whoever's speaking.
I go through most days hearing at least one voice in my head, so
I'm not getting any echo right now, so it sounds
cool.
good on my end.
All right. So can you hear me good? Good in audio? Yeah, nodding your head. It's cool. All right. So a little better introduction. Ironically enough, I'm kind of here because one of your past guests, in a way, John Parr, really had a tremendous contribution to the direction I took. I come from an agricultural family, so I'd been around farming. We weren't farmers, but my uncle's a produce broker. So, we'd go walk in the fields, we'd talk with farmers, we would see how things went right, we would see how things went wrong, talk about fertilizing and the movement of produce across the United States. So that was my farming, my experience with farming, I guess you could say. But around 2014, I started volunteering at every organic farm I could through the WOOF program, and that took me to Viridis, where John Parr had back in 2014. And it was a really good experience because, I was in an abandoned cut flower greenhouse on a bare bones budget, and some farmers that were just doing some heroic shit to get through. And that's pretty much what cannabis is doing right now. So the farther I get away from that experience, the more important it seems. So that was pretty cool. But after that, I just did a ton of woofing at different organic farms with the intention of becoming some sort of agronomist or farm advisor. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. I did have some friends from high school that got into cannabis, and so I got to hang out in those grow rooms early on and see what was working there and what was not working. And then I'd say somewhere around 2014-15, I actually called into Forever Flowering and talked to Eric on the phone. And I was trying to get a hold of some Dragonfly products. And we started talking about tea brewing. And he said something to the effect of, if any money's on the line and you legitimately want to learn how to tea brew, go find this Elaine Ingham lady and listen to her. And I took that advice pretty strongly, and I tracked down Elaine Ingham and found her at a workshop somewhere in Ojai, and she was quite difficult to get hold of that time. So from 2014 on, I went to every workshop I could, and then I think 2015 is when she offered her first online program, so I took that. I now work as an advisor for the program for people that go through the entire internet classes and want to continue on to become certified advisors. Both my wife and I do that. My wife took a very similar path. She's taken the same classes with Elaine. That's actually how we met. So we both do the microscope work, both work with Elaine, and we do a consulting business. Started interacting with the kind of greater cannabis community outside of my own circle because Southern California isn't too hip on anything that has to do with organic. It's all chemical, indoor, toxic shit, which actually was a priceless experience. I mean, I've been bathed in Avid, Eagle 20, Floramite, the whole shit. Like, I'm super familiar with it. So when I have a client spray Eagle 20 now, like, I know. So
Stinging arms.
yeah, yeah, all of it. Yeah, the Avid makes little pricklies. The Eagle 20 visually shows itself to me. It's a dead giveaway in the plant leaves, if you know what you're looking at. Dead giveaway. Avid changes the shape of the structure of the leaf as well. It usually makes the fingers thinner. It actually changes the serrations. So if you're observant enough and you know what you're looking at, it's a dead giveaway. So so I've worked very closely with Dr. Lane Ingham. When she first started the classes, you could go through and get certified, but there was no official formal advisors, so you got to work directly with her. So when I entered the commercial market, like, she was walking me through my first jobs, and that was a remarkable experience, and it really kept us from having any really expensive problems or learning lessons. She gave us a lot of heads up on, you know, how to not knock some of these plants down with a bad compost tea. So that's been very valuable. We've done that for about the last 2 years at the commercial level, working in light depth greenhouses. Most of my early work came working for other consultants that were managing other properties that were having difficulty, not having difficulty navigating, but just the difficulties that come with navigating the regulated era. And so I was hired to kind of quantify and kind of streamline or high performance people's programs. So my wife and I have positively impacted well over 1 million square feet of indoor cannabis production. We're starting to get more into the greenhouses, but considerable amount there as well. So was that a long enough? I have no idea how long I've been talking. Feels like an acid trip. That makes sense?
Oh yeah.
It
No,
sounds
that's
like
awesome.
an acid trip too.
So do you do much work with ferments at all, or out of curiosity?
So no, I haven't, but it's very popular right now. It's like, how long of an answer? We could talk for 9 hours about KNF. I keep it really simple, to be honest. We put a ton of focus onto the compost quality. So if the compost starts with desirable populations and ratios of good organisms, then the less you have to do with it. And that's really what I learned from John over at Beardus. You know, he said something to the effect of, you know, simplicity is the only thing that works at scale. And his aquaponics systems there were so amazingly simple. And so I've tried to adopt that, you know, that statement in my practice. And the first time we got hired by a group that had 27 properties, how do you brew tea? How do you make ferments? How do you know, do all these complicated tasks? So from my perspective and my focus and my understanding comes from things that can be scaled and transferred from person to person through SOPs stuck to the wall, you know, stuff like that. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And how long have you been doing the consulting in the cannabis business now?
I think publicly to the outside world since 2015.
Awesome.
Up to that, it was all you know, through my own network and things like that. So.
Very cool. I think what you said on Instagram the other night was a good way to explain the ferments, because there is a lot of sugars, right? And there is a lot of, what did you guys say, a lot of alcohol and a lot of sugar? Yeah. So, well, I think the more appropriate answer to the difficulties of KNF is context. You know, we're talking about taking Korean natural farming, which has a very specific climate, has a very specific set of plants. So rice is native to that region, which is why they use it in the base of the ferments. And if you want to get really technical, white rice is not native to the United States. And so when you take white rice and you go into the mountains and you try to harvest beneficial fungi, what you end up getting is a lot of fungi that decompose very simple compounds, not
hard, woody, lignous materials that are the fungi in that forest. And so I think one of the biggest difficulties of KNF is, from my perspective, from the basis of what I've learned from Elaine Ingham, it's far easier to harvest the wrong organisms than it is the bad organisms. And then you've done it with pure white sugar, which isn't what you make, you know, bodybuilders out of. That's what you make cancer out of. And so there's a lot of difficulties with harvesting the right organisms, and then are those the right organisms that are going to support where your cannabis plant naturally exists in an ecosystem? And so there's no doubt that it's beneficial, and it can increase terps, and it can increase cannabinoids. And I think more people should know this type of make your own nutrients, especially heading into uncertainty in the future. But there's definitely some clear issues with the type of organisms that people are harvesting, and then how they're feeding them with the processes that they're doing.
Have you done anything with like harvesting products in the area, you know, instead of white rice, whatever, you know?
Indigenous product,
Indigenous,
like
yeah, so
suggests.
Yeah, so like really the $1 million question is, who can figure out how to AMF, you know, America, natural farming, and try to harvest higher level organisms. If you think about, there's this term called ecological succession, and that's the description for starting at bare rock or tremendous devastation event, moving over towards climax forest and old growth forest. And as you move from bare rock to old growth forest, the organisms get more complex to support a different type of life. If we're taking white rice, that is just a basic starch that, you know, like yeasts grow on. Those would be the organisms that are most appropriate for pioneer species like grasses, shrubs possibly, but definitely early pioneer organisms. And your cannabis plant is looking for support from fungi that are closer to or in a climax, you know, redwood type forest. That's why we ended up in the regions, that's one of the reasons why we ended up in the regions we did, is because when we planted our plant in that forest soil, there was a tremendous amount of correct types of nutrients that plant is going to thrive in. And so what we got to kind of do from the KNF camp is, you know, how do we substitute components that are easy to break down, that you can break down into different nutrient bases other than compost. I'm thinking really creative here, you know, but, you know, can you go into the forest and collect forest stuff and compost that, you know? A really simple way to do that is just literally go into the forest and grab soil, not a ton, don't fill your truck up, but like, you know, a sandwich baggie full, and put that into a worm bin. Like, you know, from a perspective of input and effort for your cannabis plant, you're more likely to get more beneficial organisms from taking a handful of forest soil, composting it properly in a worm bin, and then just using that, you know. There's other difficulties with nutrients in the living soil with the ferments, because they're loaded with alcohols, and alcohols precipitate calcium and the other anionic nutrients like potassium, the ones that are water leachable. And so if you're constantly bombarding the top of your living soil with alcohols, you're antagonizing the type of environment that the organisms that will help your plant like to naturally live in. And so as you add more and more alcohol, you start to precipitate your nutrients, and that's totally what we see in the pictures of people from KNF. They're having calcium deficiencies, which is leading to sucking pests. Calcium is also the size of the tire, you know, so there's smaller flowers, and then potassium is also being lost, and so the flower isn't filling properly. And I think it's mostly to blame from all the sugar, and the alcohol is very antagonistic to the living soil. So people are definitely doing it well, but I also get a lot of soil samples from people doing KNF that also have russet mites, and I have a hard time agreeing that a system is working for you if you're also including russet mites at the end of the sentence. That's not working. That's a tremendous pest, and we need to look at why it's not working and make some adjustments so we can get it to work the way you want, you know.
So you're talking about doing this and not in aquaponics, but in soil and soilless based kind of grows.
Yeah, Roger. So
Because I'll tell you why, so you can answer. Because like say BrayneGro and these guys are doing aquaponics, and they are using the potassium and the phosphorus in the ferments to supplement their top root zone. All right. That's why they don't put it in the fish, but they have to, because the fish are nitrogen and they're doing it that way. So in a different science, it seems to work different. Now, I'm not an aquaponic grower either, but I'm getting ready to, and I've got some fish, you know, that I'm getting ready to buy, but clarify that because I wanted to make sure that, because in their case, they're using it, like you said, it's high in potassium and phosphorus, and you know, and you have with the alcohols, and also just maybe you can address that a little bit too.
Yeah, well, and then plus there's a whole bunch of different things that are made through Korean natural farming that address pretty much everything that you're talking about. And I mean, I was gonna jump in, but there was just too many points to hit. I was just like, well, you said calcium. Like, well, we got the water soluble calcium, the indigenous microorganisms that you go and harvest yourself from your local areas. You know, you can do it like a grass-based or forest-based. There's just so many ways to change it up, you know?
Yeah, there's no doubt that you can make it work. That's fascinating about the aquaponics. That's probably a great way to supplement. I think one of the things that needs to be talked about that nobody is talking about with KNF, you know, if we go to a regulated state and we take a flower and we run it through testing, the flower can test, but the extract can fail because we're concentrating compounds and pesticides. So what happens when you take a fruit with pesticides and you concentrate it and add alcohol and then give it to your plant? And there's a lot of like sudden death going on in KNF, and how many people are pesticide testing? I've worked in some agriculture and I don't trust none of them fuckers. So, you know, I would like to see pesticide testing on some of these ferments. And what are we concentrating and then feeding to our plants? And what's the effect of that? And what happens if you take multiple fruits? And I know people are doing it from their own, but I know people are also doing it from the grocery store. And
I think Marty touched on that, and it's too bad he's not here because he was perfect for this right now. Marty would be awesome. Marty would probably say something about, he makes sure he gets, what he does is he goes to the store and finds organic fruit that's been approved organically. Now, you can address whether you believe that or not. That people would probably be interested in knowing, but he uses organic fruit and he tries to find it on the rotten side and get a discount, and that's what he makes his ferments out of. He does it out of his aquaponics. So he grows stuff in his aquaponic system as a companion plants to the cannabis to also be able to ferment. So
yeah, as far as the pesticide stuff, I'm not exactly too sure what you would be worried about, because we use natural stuff like ginger, turmeric, and things like that to make what's it called? Oh, the name of it eludes me right now, but it's basically like what they use to for pesticide. But I mean, who's spraying anything, you know, on it whenever trichomes are already starting to form anyway? I think that's a problem regardless of what you're putting on it. So
I guess more clearly what I'm talking about is, you know, cannabis is a phytoremediator. It's fantastic at pulling up heavy metals and chemicals and compounds, and we're seeing that already in some of these facilities that are moving into old greenhouses. They're failing tests for pesticides they're not using because they're pulling it up through the roots. So if we go to the store and buy some fruits, and those fruits are mislabeled or come from a country that, you know, maybe skirts different regulations or even has different regulations, you know, what is on that fruit? Nobody's asking that question. And you know, when you ferment that fruit, you're condensing it down, you're making an extract. And you know, just like in a commercial facility, the flower can pass, but the concentrate can fail. So I think a question that should be looked into is, what are we concentrating in these ferments and then feeding to our plants that's good at pulling them up? So not necessarily spraying the foliage, but just a component in the system, you know, whether you spray it or...
So you're talking about like, what are the ingredients that they're starting with to make the nutrients?
Yeah, I think...
Am I right?
Yeah, I think that's something that should be looking at.
Gotcha. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't know. For the most part,
Yeah.
I basically use stuff that's local to me. You know, local fruits, peaches, apples, and stuff that are growing in local people's yards. You know, stuff that's not even being paid attention to. You know, you can tell because there's a ton of fruit that just falls out on the ground and nobody cares about it. So I basically try and go and find stuff like that. You know, local foraging.
And I think what Scott was saying a minute ago was it's possible that even like a neighbor's yard where you say it's been neglected, and you feel like, well, they're not spraying nothing on it. It's in the root zone where they did some kind of a pesticide in the old days. Isn't that what you were saying? Something like that? That was a pesticide derived from the root zone.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it definitely
into.
can be an issue. Depends on, like I said, the starting ingredients of your ferment. I can definitely see where the issue would be.
And you're right, Scott. I was just watching a thing on honey today where the Chinese are diluting honey with rice and then ripping everybody off. And they've, done a bunch. It's the same thing. You're talking about mislabeled fruit. It says it's organic and it's from wherever, and it's really not organic, or it was sprayed with pesticides because it developed pests and they didn't care. They wanted to sell it. I think that's where you were going with that. And then we had the aquaponic side to throw in there too. So.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing is in south of the border of California, and organic produce that and fruits and vegetables that would be coming from Chile, Mexico, and places like that say they're certified organic have been tested to come back with chemicals in them. So I mean, one of the panels that I moderated at the Emerald Cup was on pesticide use, and there was a lot of smart guys up there talking about that stuff. And one of the testing labs said, like, for doing these mathematical equations and things, there's nothing that's truly clean. Like nothing is, everything is so contaminated everywhere we go now. It almost was a little bit scary to hear that, but that's what we're talking about is, the inputs that people get, and are they truly organic or not? And are people doing their due diligence to make sure? Because again, these things are concentrated, then the plant is grown, and then we're concentrating that material after it's harvested. And so the end users, when they're getting their vape cartridges, don't technically know, but it's definitely something that's interesting that's going on, because I also haven't met somebody that's, I haven't met everybody in the K&F community, but a lot of people that are claiming K&F also are using all sorts of stuff that I don't know that necessarily falls in the line of calling yourself K&F, and especially some of the sprays that go along with it after they get the sucking pests, or the sucking pests are part of the program, or whatever it is. But it's just a style of growing right now, and I think there's a lot of cool things that people get into. And when you look at K&F, you might as well look at compost tea. And if you look at compost tea, how do you know if it's good or not unless you get studied up like Scott and get on a microscope, or send your stuff to Scott every time, or somebody like Elaine, or these people that quantify the microbiology. You don't know if your compost tea is very good, because just because it smells good doesn't necessarily mean there isn't facultative fungi waiting to beast up on you and all hell breaks loose. So I mean, it's hard to really quantify all these things down to the T and make a claim that you're somebody, because at the end of the day, we're just trying to grow some cannabis that passes the test. If it passes the test and we're getting high, isn't that the fucking goal? I don't care if it's no-till, K&F, this, that, or the other. Like, let's just get clean shit.
Well, I think the way we tested in the old days, the way we tested in the old days, us old farts on the panel, well, when it smelled good after we made it, the testing was we put it on the plants. And if it kicked the plant's ass, it was good. But, somebody else wanted to say something, and we all jumped in.
I was going to say, it's a lot of it's nutrition too, not just like, organic speaks to what isn't on the plant, and it's a pesticide issue. And
oh damn, we lost him.
We lost him.
Well, you know what I was?
There he is.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I was
Resurrected.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I was just saying, like when I was growing tomatoes, I started growing tomatoes like I grew pot, and throwing all this nutrition on there, all this, I threw seabird guano on there and kelp, and did all this shit, right? And I'd walk into these chefs in Minneapolis, and they'd fucking taste my tomatoes and be like, "Holy fuck!" And they'd buy them for like $6 a pound, and in the middle of the summer. And it was a lesson to me, like, not just about, organic means there's lack of pesticides, lack of bad shit. But if I guess I'm just trying to get to the point that what we start with, whether it be KNF, no-till, whatever, the nutrition that went into that is highly important. And I think that really the only way you can guarantee that shit is if you source and grow that shit yourself over time,
Well, and it's also the starting material, just like a hash maker says, or somebody that makes concentrates. Your starting material is only as good as your finished material. And if we think about that, when people are taking cuttings and we're going to nurseries or a buddy or whoever it is, we've got to really hope that the mother stock was really clean and really healthy at the time, because it's easy to take cuttings when a plant is, down in the dumps a little bit. And so, if people are taking cuttings and spreading around cuttings one after the other that was coming from a plant that wasn't doing very good, I mean, it's amazing how many people lately, and I saw at the Emerald Cup this year, that were stoked on popping beans and growing seeds and all these things because it was so much easier. There was less disease. There was less problems. There was all these things. And so it's not just the statistics on contaminated cuttings because of the pesticide use. It has to do with the stockness not being healthy enough to be valid enough to take cuttings in the first place.
Agreed, man. 100%.
Yep. So what were some of the other key points and that kind of came out of that the talk that you moderated?
Mostly it was just, how people are going to navigate testing, what pesticides can they use, which ones can't they use, how do they deal with all these things going into this regulated market. And so most of it was just really getting in alignment with your local ag commissioner. Your local ag commissioner is who you're going to be reporting to if you're going to use a registered material. So, I mean, looking at the cloning gels and a lot of things, anything that has the little EPA thing on the front with a number by it is considered a registered material and needs to be, documented with the ag commissioner if you're going to use it. And so a lot of those materials that are at the hydro shop that have the little EPA thing, it would be considered a banned material in some cases if it does show up on testing. But that's where we're at now, is that, how far back can people test and how deep can you go? Is if you use some cloning gel, is it going to really show up on your tests at the end and things like that? But it was really clear that, it was really clear that you need to be tight. If you're going to be licensed and regulated, you need to be tight with your ag commissioner, and you need to pay attention to the list and go from there. And so everybody was real forthcoming and open about, creating a relationship. It's not going to the local ag commissioner nowadays that is scared to see you and doesn't want to deal with you. If it's a licensed area or a regulated area, they're going to want to build a relationship with you too. So, I mean, it's just getting people to get out there and do things that I think are more uncomfortable than usual.
We're having some funny things happen at the commercial scale that, I think applies to everybody. And the issue is that the labels are maybe not including everything that's in there. And we've taken a stance to test everything. A couple of years ago, Jeremy at Build a Soil turned everybody on the internet to an issue with a spray that was supposed to be essential oils, and somebody in Colorado failed a test for a banned rodent pesticide, And so when your material fails and there's large financial loss, you start testing everything in the building. And so we're seeing everything from rat poisons in essential oil sprays to recently in Oregon, I think it was azotrol, just tested positive for 3 or 4 things that should not at all be in that bottle, and they're causing test fails. So if you're just a small tent grower, that might not affect you, but you still need to know that. You still need to know that all kinds of garbage is getting put into these pesticides. And if you're a commercial facility, it's going to cause tremendous loss. And if you're a small guy, it's just not healthy for you. And the other talk at the Emerald Cup, one of the things they went into I thought was really interesting was there's no standard that the labs need to be held to as far as consistency or tolerances or it's like an ISO accreditation. I can't comment. I don't know what that word is. But anyways, you know, I think it's like the difference in, you know, using a brand new computer to test your material and like a Nintendo DS. Like they both are electronic devices, but considerable different computing power. And apparently there's a tremendous range in the labs across the various states as far as how well their equipment works, how closely it's dialed, and what the standard deviations on the values mean. So that's
that was kind of scary in some ways.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing that I wanted to say when I was on the panel is like, if I take a test to Steep Hill, is it going to be the same as the same result as when I go to SC Labs or whatever? And I didn't really think that was the panel to open that can of worms or whatever, but we were talking about stuff that made me really think that and want to say that at a certain point, because, you know, that's one thing that, you know, people are going to do is they're going to pick a lab and stick with that lab, and it will be because of whatever criteria or something, maybe. I don't know. I mean,
we had that in Washington. Actually, this winter, a lab got shut down, and
I read about something.
Yeah, they were servicing like 2/3 the state, and as a grower, it's kind of fucked up because they were, you know, I have nothing against these guys. I don't know them at all, but the rumor was that I heard they were testing high. So if everybody else is 2/3 of the fucking growers are out there testing there, then it's like shit, man. I'm a fool not to, because, like it or not, up in Washington, we're in a numbers economy. You know, people are buying Everclear up here. They're not, you know, buying high end shit. You know, they're not there yet. It's a, you know, for us, it's a new market. It's not. We didn't take the black market. We have these boomers. They're asking about numbers. So it's real interesting shit, man. I'm real interested to see how California works it out, because you guys have in my mind, a better palette over statewide, you know, but you're still going to go through this testing deal, you know, that puts people's mind in a weird state, you know?
Yeah, no, it definitely is weird to me, because, I mean, we had a lot I learned also from a presentation that was given by a guy from Nevada out of Green Life Productions, this guy Steve, and it was really interesting because it sounds like in Nevada that the testing is really rigorous. And I mean, you know, people can use a UV light after they harvest to try to kill off some of the, I guess, anaerobic material or some type of stuff. They clean it with a UV light. So, I mean, there's all kinds of little tricks going on too. And so whether that's okay or good, or maybe that's, you know, I mean, it's allowed, obviously. I just know that Nevada's super strict, and there's also these little, there's all these little, peroxide dumps, UV lights, and you know what I mean? I'm feeling like,
but in a world where people are resorting to dump it in peroxide, if you don't dump it in peroxide, you're like a superhero. So some of these facilities, to navigate these tough microbial contaminants, they're like microwaving it, and I think X-rays is the next step. They got these giant
not when they're doing numbers, dude, because
right.
Like, you know, like honestly, the best thing I could do is dry my weed out, because it's a percentage, right? And it bumps my number out. I'm just like, test some dry ass shit that's super high.
Yeah, see this dry high. Somebody claimed something on IG in Southern California with his high potency number, and everybody was jumping around. But I wanted to ask, what was the moisture? But
1%.
You know, if 2%. I pop in the comments and even say that, I'll get memed out and fucked with, and it never ends.
Yeah, that's the problem with going and trying to have an ongoing conversation online, which is one of the things I like to pride ourselves. I'm just going to throw this in if you guys want to check it out. At I Love Growing Marijuana, we don't allow any of that going on. If you come and try to learn something or have a conversation, you're going to be treated with respect. And if somebody doesn't treat you with respect, we'll get rid of them and get you answered and make you a happy, you know, member of the community. We're not on Facebook. Well, we are on Facebook, but I don't deal with that. That's social stuff. I'm more down to earth, nitty gritty. But you hit the nail on the head. We run across that all the time. I mean, we used to in forums trying to teach. And finally, I got lucky and found this place. And it's nice that you bring that up, because you should be able to allow. What's the point of discussing something, you know, if you're going to say, oh, I'm loud. I got to back up. I keep forgetting I'm too loud. What's the point of discussing?
We love the passion, though. We love the passion.
What's the point of having a discussion? You know, if somebody asks a question, you're going to tell them they're a dumb fuck. You know, I mean, that's what I hate about it. You know,
you can get real clicky.
Or Remy, I hear about the KNF. BrayneGro is always telling us about how, well, he's banned. He's banned from the frickin' place because he talked about some, like you said. Look, I got another business line ringing, so I'll give it back to you guys and hit on what I said. Thanks for giving me a second.
That's funny. And we're gonna have to get online with him then, or something. Scott.
Yeah, dude. No, we need some moderation. We're in a really interesting time in the transition of the community because, you know, the access to information and the connectivity of people that are finding good information. So there's a big gap between, you know, what's possible and what the worst is going on. And, you know, businesses are continuing to try and protect the profitable narrative for them, not necessarily what's best for farmers. And so we're having a tremendous amount of excitement from product makers and people that sell products when anybody with the desire to educate people on how some things are just not working or no longer working, or maybe we know more now. And so we're seeing this really bizarre pushback from garden centers that really want to protect the profitable narrative for them, not provide actual beneficial quality products to farmers. And we're having a big clash right now where, you know, somebody tries to share information that actually helps farmers. Some people view that as an attack on their product. Well, your product is causing russet mites. That's an attack on a farmer. And so, you know, sometimes communication channels need to be opened up, and, you know, people don't like it. But people are wising up. People are getting smarter. It's really easy to get in the lanes class right now. You can learn how to use a microscope for $600, and you can quantify these things for yourself. You don't need to take anybody else's information. You can be your own guru. You can do your own math. And so a lot of people are trying to pull the wool over farmers' eyes. And, you know, I get private messages from people all the time that are now qualified to quantify the bullshit. And, you know, it's quietly happening in the private space. People don't really feel comfortable enough to say it in the public space, but, you know, some of these places post data that's just like laughable garbage, and people are getting educated enough to quantify that themselves. So there's going to be some dramatic changes in the next couple of years with how people farm. And, you know, we're here trying to enter a traumatic time in the climate. You know, you can call it what you want. It's getting weird out there with the environment. And so some of these things that people like to sell are not benefiting the environment. They're not benefiting insect populations. And all this shit's coming to head. And it all matters for the same reason. You know, we need farmers to succeed. The environment's in tremendous stress right now. We've got bee populations dying like crazy. You know, it's getting heavy out there. So that's what we're witnessing right now online, is people being educated enough to communicate what's actually going on and what the facts are, and people trying to predict what's profitable for them. So I don't know. We'll see how that goes.
Awesome. Some of the work that we've been working with is using organic microbe, or say that 5 times fast. Okay, organic microbe isolation, where we isolate certain microbes and allow them to do a bunch of heavy lifting. And we've been isolating a bunch of plant proteins, some of them, for instance, precursors to chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, as well as some of the immune system response proteins for cannabis and some other plants, specifically from some of the methods that we've been working with. What are your thoughts on that? The nice thing about it is that by introducing those proteins into the plant, I don't have any residue left over to concentrate. I'm not going to test hot for any of my funky, you know, this, that, or the other, and it's kind of a backdoor way around it. Yes, you can't get 100%, but we've actually had really, really, really good results with mold, and then we've had some other really cool results with aphids and a couple of other things. We're still working on mites, but we have some directions on that. But we're actually, that's some of the stuff that we're working on right now without giving away anything I can't talk about.
That's pretty cool. One of the things I learned at the aquaponics class about plants, and one of the things that we kind of talk about also in the you know, about soil and things like that is how the plants uptake all this water and these nutrients. And what I found at the Ouroboros farm was interesting because it was a glass greenhouse with, you know, I think those deep water culture rows or whatever were like 40 feet long or 60. I mean, they were huge. It was really long rows of deep water culture, but the greenhouse was kind of old and there was tears in the shade cloth. And so when the sun would come out, the whole shade cloth was deployed. And what would happen with the ripped area of the shade cloth is that the lettuce heads right there in that particular area would get more sunlight, and it would cause them to use more water and nutrients and transpire more. And so they would actually start to go into nutrient lockout or having, I think, too much calcium or something, because the edges of the lettuce would get all crusty and gray or whatever. And so the other thing is that if you got real far back in the greenhouse and looked across, you could kind of see the beam of light coming down just on those few lettuce heads in that raft. And they actually you could see the bugs swarming around right there. And I remember at the class, Murray and a bunch of people, they were testing the water in the fish. They were testing the water in the deep rafts. They were testing all these things, which, you know, makes sense or whatever. But at the end of the day, it was just the amount of water that particular plant was using because of its condition or its circumstance it was in. It wasn't in a uniform condition like the rest of the plants in that deep water culture raft. And so, you know, if that can happen, you know, in a system that's all together with one plant, you know, it can be very confusing to people. I know it was at the class, and it took me a while to kind of pinpoint that, but, you know, those variations and things like that are what throw people off and, you know, can cause people to do things and break out the chemicals or do radical changes, when sometimes it's a simple, you know, in that case, tearing the shade cloth.
That's interesting, because I know all about deep water raft culture, because that's what I do. I don't do that anymore, but I have a hydroponics greenhouse is what I have. And my buddy had a deep water, he had a 30 by 144 foot Nexus Columbine greenhouse with a pool in there, a deep water culture pool built out of cinder block and vinyl, like a pond, big pond reservoir. And he grew lettuce until that big scare. Well, probably 8-9 years ago in California, where they had the lettuce go bad, and then nobody in the whole country would buy lettuce. So it ruined his, but he grew romaine. I mean, and he grown romaine that was like 16, 18 inches tall, like killer romaine, and start out at one end, little seedlings and all. But yeah, the little ripping the shade cloth.
It makes a big difference
there.
Yeah, because of this particular greenhouses, when they're glass greenhouses, they're trapping and condensing a ton of air. So if it's a hot day, it's, you know, the greenhouse effect is huge. And so when the shade cloth is deployed, it's really important for the relief of the plants. And if there's a tear in that and it's getting that direct sunlight, those particular plants are heating up more than the others. And what does the plant do to keep itself cool? It transpires. And it doesn't need the nutrient. It's going to lock it out, and it's going to freak it out at the same time. So it was really interesting to see in those deep water rafts. And the other thing that I learned after that class was I met Max Myers. He's a guy up in Mendocino that does aquaponics, and he's the one that introduced compost tea to aquaponic systems to get more biology into the system and stuff like that.
Good idea.
This office that I'm in right now is actually, these shelves used to have fish tanks on them, and this office was a glass fish bowl, so to speak, itself. That was an indoor aquaponics room that we were trying to use, that Max set up as kind of a display. But man, it's a lot of work to do aquaponics. And I mean, I was growing shit in here. I had phosphorus water the whole time. I couldn't get my nitrates up for shit, and I don't know what I was doing. I changed the water. I fed the fish more. I did all kinds of shit, and finally I got frustrated and turned it into an office.
Yeah, but the people that actually understand the water chemistry are absolutely getting increases in their tests. So,
well, they're geniuses, though. I'm not a water chemist. I'm a fucking guy. You know what I mean? I'm over here with this little.
For sure. One of the things I want to touch on too that Eric was talking about was facility considerations and the massive variations that are coming with the new scale. And I think that everybody's so overwhelmed with every other aspect of moving up in scale that they're having a hard time just looking across their facility and just noticing things like, you know, noticing hot spots. taking enough measurements in the facility to realize the massive variation across the scale. I think it's a little bit difficult to get into during this podcast, but that's what I plan on talking about at the workshop that Josh talked about at the end of the month in Portland, 26th to 28th, I think are the dates. I'll be speaking on Friday for a couple hours. What I want to talk about is those differences at scale and how the biology fluctuates across a 53,000 square foot greenhouse. And then what happens when there's 5 53,000 square foot greenhouses on a property. That doesn't apply to the tent farmer, but the same patterns are happening in a 4x4 tent that are happening in a 40,000 square foot facility. It's just magnified. And so I don't know that anybody else has looked as closely as we have looked. With the microscope, both my wife and I perform the microscopes. So when we go to a facility, we get a tremendous amount of data logged. And so I think we've looked at biology on a level that nobody else has even really tried to. And there's some very clear patterns. There's some very consistent problems. And it's from my perspective, at least from the living soil growers, we could probably cut out half the garbage of pesticides and headaches if we just actually had an even distribution of organisms across our property. One of the biggest examples I see is with predatory nematodes. Predatory nematodes are some of the easiest organisms to see on a microscope slide. All you have to do is make a drop, put it on there, and it's like a giant worm. It's super easy to see and count. And so you don't even need to be technically savvy. You just need to be able to get a sample onto a cover slip to be able to see if the predatory nematodes you ordered are even alive and how are they distributing across the property. I have yet to be in a facility that had an even distribution of predatory nematodes across their soil. There is always major sections that has no nematodes. So every Monday, employee walks into the building, sees on the whiteboard there's a gnat problem. So they go to the refrigerator, they get the nematodes, they put them into the reservoir, they distribute them horribly unevenly across the facility. And so you have massive pockets where there's no predatory nematodes dealing with the pest problem. And so there's these little pockets, and we're very good at doing things identically across the facility because that's how production works. So the same pockets are usually pretty consistent across the facility. And so if 30% of our growing area doesn't even have predatory nematodes across every room in our facility, that means it looks like it's across the whole property, but really it's in little pockets in each section that we do. And so one of the things we help people do is just even that distribution out. And so that you're actually getting the protection against the larvae of the pest that you think you are. And once you do that, you can limit pest sprays and things like that. But there's tremendous difficulty at scale, and the patterns are similar. So I'm going to try and make some visual images to convey those messages. And then Eric and I do like a Q&A. I think there's some other really cool people coming along too, but Eric and I have had some good success talking about the pest and disease issues and how the greenhouse environment leads to it, how that affects soil conditions, and how that contributes to the pest and disease problems. And so I think people have gotten a lot of value from that little back and forth that we do to kind of understand the patterns that we're all doing, and just from a different perspective.
I think we found lately that we finally got it across to a lot of people that are becoming successful because there's so much knowledge out there now. And if they get on the right place for information and are treated kindly, and they can, we find that they learn fast and grow fast. And what we've been teaching a lot the last year, it's not exactly what you were saying, but it attributes you're getting into the subculture and the microbial stuff. We're finding that adding that to really good nutrient and keep, all the environment right, but making the plant stronger itself causes the pests. Is a proactive way to keep the pests and disease from ever happening. And now we're getting into this microbial and subculture. All us stoners out here doing this too. Some pretty scientific shit going on here, But yeah, I love that. That's all. It follows right along. I mean, this is perfect. It's a great show tonight, by the way. I'm just loving it.
I have a question. That lettuce thing, Eric, sparked me. So I'm putting lights in my greenhouse right now. They're putting them up, and I got 70. It's a 30 by 96, 72 LEDs. and we're gonna put a row of HPS down the middle. And the kind of idea was to eventually have it so I end up having 36 HPS in there, 72 LEDs, really overload the shit, right? I live in the, in Bellingham, right? Yeah, but and now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, shoot, man, those HPS, that's going to create some different climates. And I know people do some of that shit. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it depends on how the spacing is of the lights, how far away they are from the plants, because the higher they are, the more they spread. When it comes to the sun, though, the sun brings a tremendous amount of infrared, which brings the heat. And so when you have LED lights, for instance, or even big high-pressure double-ended, they don't have as much intense infrared like the sun does. So, I mean, a surface will heat up in the sun much hotter than a grow light will heat up that same surface, let's say.
Gotcha.
Not saying that it doesn't have an impact and can be effective, but the sun is intense.
Right.
And so when you start using like a greenhouse cover that might magnify the light, especially a glass greenhouse that doesn't have ventilation, that is getting tremendous amounts of solar gain, and the only relief to the plants might be that shade cloth that's deployed. You have plants that heat up, and then like that rip in the cloth, you have magnified light going to that particular leaf surface. That leaf surface heats up more than the air temperature, and therefore it's got to cool itself. And so that's what we really try to pay attention to. It's not just the environment, it's the leaf surface temperature, it's even the soil temperature, and even what the biology in the soil is doing. Because if you look at aquaponics, they got to maintain a certain water temperature for nutrient exchange to happen, for fish to want to eat. I mean, you have cold water, the fish aren't going to eat, and shit ain't happening. And the same thing happens in the soil. Let it get under 55 and shit's going to go down. So keeping the soil temps up and maintained properly, keeping enough light is good, but air temp can be, lower in a lot of cases as long as the root zone temp is up. But when we get into the summertime, obviously the idea is to keep the root zone semi-cool and also the leaf surface temperature cool. But a lot of people get thrown off by the fact that the only way to cool something is to turn on an air conditioner. And so we've worked really hard to show people that you can actually cool a plant easier or just as easy by cooling the surface rather than cooling the air to do that. And one person might say, or you might look at shade cloth as a way to do that. You know what I mean? Shade cloth gives plants a relief and restricts the light so that you do get a lower leaf surface temperature. But at the end of the day, a lot of people want all the light they can get because they're growing cannabis. So, I mean, the more light, the better, type of thing. And so over the years, we've decided that the diffuse greenhouse covers, the diffuse, you can't see directly through, and it spreads the light uniformly. It helps scatter infrared so you don't get the hot spots. And it actually blocks out UVB, which a lot of people in the greenhouses go, well, I'm getting all this UV, but even glass will inhibit UVB. And UVB actually is the discoloring and degrading UV. So when you leave something out in the sun, it gets light bleached, or your plastic toys get cracked up in the sun because you left them out there too long. It's usually because of UVB exposure. So then when you think of cannabis that's got these, it's trying to grow these resinous heads. You're trying to get all these terpenes that are really delicate, and the CBDs even that seem to melt off and burn away real easy. We can't always be out in the hot sun, and then also having the wrong greenhouse covers can actually make it worse or make it better. And so we see a lot of people working harder, not smarter. They're using the wrong colors, the wrong layers to the whole equation because, again, greenhouses were invented for wintertime, not the summer. When a plant heats up, it sweats. When a plant sweats, it creates condensation. So a lot of the condensation people are worried about or trying to get rid of might be result from plants overheating and sweating. And it might be a ventilation issue. It could be the greenhouse cover. It might even be the ground cover people are using, because when we use black colors in the summertime, it encourages more surface temp. Look at the containers everybody uses. They're black plastic pots. I see them behind you right now.
But if you use white floor, you end up with algae all over the damn floor too.
Well, you can, and we've seen that too. But especially in aquaponics, and there has to be some type of cleaning regimen that goes on. You know what I mean? There has to be somebody in there power washing between each round, and maybe even use some type of trays to collect that water. But black is bad. Let's put it that way. It can be used in the wintertime. And so that's why I've really, over the years, tried to coin the two different terms for greenhouses because, again, greenhouses were invented for wintertime, but cannabis growers love to use them in the hot summer sun. And so we got to look at them in two different modes, summer mode and winter mode. And so we can use the right colors that we want in the winter and the colors in the summer.
I think one of the, I don't want to speak for Eric, but I think, a collective passion is just trying to share the consistent patterns that we see. And I think Eric and I are both good at seeing patterns, and our role in the industry has taken us through a tremendous number of properties. And one of the things cannabis growers are good at is locking themselves in a room and growing a bunch of cannabis. And so I think one of the goals of this workshop is to try and just get the discussion starting about the same patterns that everybody's experiencing. And from our perspective, if we don't run black ground cover in the summer and we don't run black pots, then we don't have to use nasty pesticides. If we use proper techniques in respect to the biology and get the things spread across the facility, well, no, you're good. And then and just talk about the same things that everybody's experiencing. There's some very simple things as far as combinations of facility and how's your facility set up and what components are you using, and that leads greatly to
well, and that's the problem. There's not enough transparency and people actually going, here's what's going wrong. Here's where I went wrong. And I'm starting to get that. Scott gets it in the DM. Like I teach the greenhouse class at Oaksterdam University. And I basically go over, a hot topic in the greenhouse industry is, do I go sealed or do I, can I open it up? And if I go sealed, I'm going to be protected from the bugs. Positive pressure, negative pressure, that's a big topic too, because again, it's to try to protect from bugs and disease. And so, we have all the sprays trying to protect us from the bugs. We have the UV lights, we got the positive pressures, we got, the sealed greenhouses. Is that really protecting everybody? No, it's not. We have people coming to us going, I have problems here, I have problems there. And one of the things I teach in the class is the difference between, passive ventilation and mechanical ventilation and using a wet wall or not. And one of the things that Scott and I noticed is that at one end of the greenhouse, obviously it's cooler, and at the other end of the greenhouse, it's warmer because the air's coming in, it travels 100 feet. By the time it leaves the greenhouse, it's had a chance to heat up. If the calculations weren't done right on the air exchange, you might have warmer air coming out than you have, altogether. We had somebody report back this year at 78-degree temperatures coming in and 130 going out. And what happens is at one end of the greenhouse, closer to the wet wall, the biology in the soil changes because it doesn't use as much water. When you get to the other end of the greenhouse where it's bone dry, the biology obviously has changed because it's drying out faster, but the person watering is watering the same every time. They don't change the watering patterns. And then what happens for me is that I go to the end of the class at this last one, and sure enough, a guy comes up to me with his cell phone and goes, here's my greenhouse, look at this. And he shows me a sealed greenhouse with a wet wall, and the plants at the end where the exit is, where the exhaust fans are, the plants are huge. And then the plants, the rest of the greenhouse are all stunted and fucked up looking because he basically watered the same, and the plants at the other end had a chance to dry out. That was the simple fact that it probably was a better running system at the other end of the greenhouse where it might seem hostile to a person, but ultimately the soil was drying out. And there was a good enough airflow that the leaf surface could stay down.
People have no clue the amount of variances that are going from one end of the greenhouse to the other, from water consumption to climate. And Eric and I are obsessive nerds, so we measure all this shit, so one of the easiest things people can do is just measure leaf surface temperature. Where is the stress plants in your greenhouse? Walk around with a $6 laser light and point all the plants. I don't know the math. Eric will speak up to the numbers, but there's a certain point where it's obvious that this plant is not happy. I think the leaf temp should be under the ambient air temperature. So you just shine your laser light at white. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what's important to do, is to be able to know these things and go through the greenhouse and make sure it's a uniform spread. And using the infrared thermometer, this is one where I keep it with me everywhere I go, so you can see right there. But I just point and shoot, and it tells me what the temperature is. And so I don't really care what the air temperature is all the time, because the air temperature is the air temperature. But if I understand what the leaf surface temperature is, I can get a better idea of how the plant feels. Who gives a shit how I feel? I'm in socks and shoes and a hat, and most people in these regulated places are wearing suits and gloves and all kinds of shit. So of course they're going to be hot and sweaty. Yeah, I mean, they walk into a grow room and go, "Whoa, it feels like shit in here." Well, no shit, you're in a fucking monkey suit and the plants are naked.
Well, I just wanted to say my greenhouse is open. I use the 54-inch fans, you know, like 52,000 CFM fans, and the shutters and all that stuff run either triggered by humidity or temperature and such like that. I drip to waste. Okay, I make my own nutrients, but I make them out of salts. I buy the 50-pound bags, and I buy chelates from micronutrients and all, and you know, buy them from that place in Colorado. And also, I use Southern Ag. I love them. So yeah, they'll deliver me for $20, whatever I want for $20. Because
there's some new, you know, there's some interesting facts coming out of Denver. I heard a stat that Denver City has incurred $9 million a year in added costs dealing with the algal blooms from drain to waste techniques from hydroponics in the area. And so there's some conversation going on as to who's responsible for this, you know. Like right now, the average citizens are getting taxed for this increased cost, and they're talking about coming back on cannabis farmers. Like, that's a tremendous strategy consideration for people in these regulated states. And, you know, they're starting to quantify, they're starting to really quantify the environmental effect and the additional costs from cannabis to the states. Like, it's not all magic money for the schools. Like, there's a tremendous amount of trash being incurred. There's a tremendous amount of chemical damage being done to the planet. And there's some people working on it, you know, and so there's some new topics that need to be thrown into the discussion bowl, you know.
Well, Clemson University, where, you know, that's our school here in South Carolina, they do fertigation, which is drip tape down at the root zone in your soil, you know, typical row bed. But instead of relying on, you don't add a bunch of chemical fertilizer. They make, you know, you could do it either way. But Clemson actually has a chemical fertilizer liquid concentrate they use. And what they're doing is in the Black River facility over there, they are doing testing on the watershed runoff. They're actually taking samples going down several feet to control that for so drip to waste, or whether you're doing fertigation or drip to waste or spray to waste, which is what I do really, is I don't even have a lot of overrun on mine, so I wouldn't have, but there is controversy about drain to waste. Any kind of drain to waste, there is controversy of it getting into the aquifers, and so they're doing a lot of studies here. At Clemson, at the Black Edisto River facility, you can Google it, where they're taking soil samples. They're doing fields with fertigation where they've stopped adding salts and all, and they're using whatever they've come up with. I don't know what that is. You know, it's because the farmers I know that use this technique are kicking it. But it's great that you bring that up, because people don't realize that too. But yeah, and I kind of felt like I'm a bad guy when you brought it up too. Because, you know, I don't want to be ruining anybody's environment.
I didn't mean to make you feel like a bad guy. I don't
want to ruin anybody's environment. Yeah. But what I'll say is,
Scott, once again.
Yeah, but I am in a place where the university that's responsible for agriculture in the Southeast pretty much is monitoring this and letting us know how much we can overwater, the like 20% or whatever, overflow. So they're seeing how much and how deep it penetrates. It's much exactly like the dual root zone. You can only add the ferments just enough before they drip into the fish. So it's the same way. It's like you can only allow the
just don't drink the water in Iowa. You know what I mean? Don't drink the trap water in Iowa.
You just can only allow it to penetrate so deep before it does affect the aquifers. So that's an interesting point. And, you know, I wanted to address back, if I could, you guys, because you got off on the greenhouse thing along with the about the LEDs and the HID lights you have, Joshua.
Yeah.
I think some of another answer for that too is that you can find usage. If you have all those lights, there's different times of day and different environments and different times of the season and different, whether the sun's out or not, that you can implement those lights to help you, and it'll just take trial and error.
Correct. I mean, there's greenhouse sensors that can turn on and off the lights according to how much light is available.
The cool thing about the LEDs is they actually dim on these ones, so they'll up and down and dim, and it's pretty dope.
Yeah. So I just wanted to bring that up, that with that kind of array of lights, you'll find a good use for them, but it might not be something that you run constantly, is where I'm getting at.
Yeah, totally. No,
I'll give it back to you other guys on the conference.
The reason I went so big on it was it's larger than what most people would recommend. Was because I live in an area where it's so off and on cloudy. It's like, I'm competing with indoor grows, and so
I wish I could grow outdoors. Is all I got to say.
There's a certain point where too many lights, I guess, starts to block out. I don't know. I'll let Eric comment on that. But some of these guys are going like on 8 foot by 8 foot or something. What are those numbers, Eric?
Well, I might be too dense. I mean, so if it was a 4x4 pattern,
well, that would be
indoor feet of canopy. So if it was a 4x4 pattern, there'd be 112 lights, and this is 84 lights or something like that.
Well, a 1,000-watt light like the one above my head right now, they say to do an 8x8. Some cases, depending on a low light level area, they might even say a 5x8, I guess. But
I'd say
I'm pretty cool.
8x8, depending on your reflective walls, or if you're not wide open, that depends too. It's a footprint. Yeah.
Well, it's the reflector of the light too. PL lights used to tell me back in the day that a 600-watt light spread more than a 1,000-watt light, much easier. And so when you get a 1,000-watt light and not a very good reflector, you end up getting hot spots. And so then you end up doing the same thing to the plants that we were talking about that the sun does. You end up heating up the leaf surface in these areas that you don't want it to.
Oh, that's what I didn't get to touch on. The leaf surface temperature is something that we've all become aware of. And I'm glad that you brought it up. I really want to talk to you some more, dude, because having a greenhouse and all. I mean, I'm telling you what, and you teach at a college too. Yeah, you'd have a good buddy to have, but I would love to do different. I'd like to discuss different ideas. Now, Stephen has helped me some. Oh, there's something else I wanted to talk about in relation to the greenhouse. Now, you guys are talking about dirt greenhouses too, where I'm talking about concrete floor. The way to do it is radiant floor heating. Root zone cool in the summer, and the root zone warm in the winter. You put radiant floor heating in the concrete. Of course, make sure you insulate the ground before you put the concrete, because I got a friend that poured this giant 8-inch deep slab in the same size, like 144 by 30-foot greenhouse, and he didn't insulate it. So, and he's got all these CO2 generators and all, and he's China's probably got a heating problem, but he's got no heat in his greenhouse. So if y'all build a slab, make sure you insulate that slab.
You got to insulate it, and you got to have radiant heat. That's why, like I was talking about with the infrared gun, plant temp is everything. So like in aquaponics, what happens if the water gets cold? The plants get cold, the roots are cold, the whole deal. So the same in the wintertime. If you let the roots get cold, all shit breaks. Nothing much happens, actually.
If you keep the roots warm, the plant won't die.
You won't get disease as much in the wintertime, but you won't get dank nuggets either.
Well, but that's, you got to go with what you go. If it's too cold, unless you got millions of dollars, you just have to deal with what you have to deal with. But radiant floor heating is probably the best way in a greenhouse to protect yourself and have more control over your environment inside than anything else you can do.
Yeah.
And then,
one of the things that I'm seeing is really popular. People are moving to living soil in there in really small fabric pots, and then a lot of these states require you to lift the plants up off the ground, so they're on rolling benches or tables that have airflow underneath, and then they drag air across the facility to keep the greenhouse proper. And some of these places are really cold, so they're dragging cold air across a really small pot ecosystem, and nobody's taking soil temperatures. It may be 74 degrees inside this greenhouse, and it's, like Eric said, it's really comfortable for the employees, but what is going on with your plant? And if you stake a little thermometer and put it into the soil, you got, lower than 50-degree soil temperatures in some of these facilities in Colorado and whatnot. And I'm not sure what the exact number is, but I can tell you once it gets below 60, things significantly slow down. And we'll actually see a inhibition in organism growth and getting the populations that we're normally used to in some of these places with the colder soil temps. So, you know, we were at a facility in Colorado and they had like below 50-degree soil temperatures, and the plants were not doing well, and the plants were not happy. The purple stripe showing nutrient deficiencies and all that, you know.
Yeah, it's freezing out here right now. I can tell you that. But yeah, too many people call me with not knowing what their soil temp is, and that's a big problem in the wintertime. And you know, I mean, you can blow all the hot air around you want, but if it doesn't heat the soil, what good is it going to do? So that's a huge problem with wintertime growing. And most people find this out when they go into flowering. They don't, you know, the plants will actually veg out okay, somewhat slower, but the flowering process is hit the brakes.
Well, what happens at 50 degrees is when the cell damage occurs. It starts to have serious cell damage, and then once it gets to 40 degrees, the plant starts to die. The cells start to die. So above 50 degrees is what we got to keep it at least. But once a plant or root zone is below 50 degrees or at 50 degrees, once it gets below 50 degrees, in my teachings from Crop King and all, that's when you start to experience cell damage in the roots or the plant and flower or leaves itself. And they're down to 40. Once you get to 40, you start to the cells start to die.
Right.
And so
that's when we take cuttings.
Exactly. But I just wanted you, because since Scott brought up the 50-degree, or that was you. Okay, you guys keep flipping around. Okay, that's Scott right in front of me, right?
but we were agreeing with what you said.
No, that's Scott.
Radiant floor hearing, you know. People aren't warming the root zone where the bills are getting paid, but they're spending a tremendous amount of money to make it comfortable for employees or make the wall thermometer be nice. And nobody's looking at the soil temperatures, you know.
I think that problem is because of maybe that's overregulation or something. Why do they have to have them on there? Why can't they have them on the floor where they built the thing to have heat on the floor, and then they're made to put them on on wheels? So that's the problem. It's not the So we have a problem there. I mean, we don't have that here.
Becoming master growers.
Yeah, but see, if you're paying, like, it costs a shitload of money to put a radiant floor in a greenhouse. It's probably the most expensive thing that you ever have to do.
It's a chunk for sure, and it's a huge investment. But that's the thing: if you're going to go into this and you're going to grow in the wintertime, and you're going to grow some trachylarf, I mean, what's the point of that too? So, I mean, you kind of don't have a choice. The only way that I see around it is that if people do rolling benches or benches up off the ground and they're using small containers, but just like Scott said, you get into trouble with the soil food web in these small containers. And so, you know, while there's pros and cons over here to maybe do this to mitigate that, you know, you kind of fuck one thing to fuck another. I mean, it doesn't always work out that way. So ultimately, you got to get the shit. You got to get everything that you need to make it work if you're going to go commercial. Right. You can't, you know, half-ass over here, but you can definitely pick the seasons that you spend your money. You know, like if it's summertime, you don't have to buy the heating system till fall. And a lot of people are coming to me going, oh, I'm going to get hot lights, heat, all this shit. And I go, when's the greenhouse ready to be operational? They say springtime. And I go, you're going to use the lights and the heat? Well, no.
Right. Nope.
So we got to look at where we spend our money and when we spend it, because too many people have the idea that I know that they need it, but when do they need it, and can we execute it in a timely fashion so that people can stay in business?
Yeah, and the right combination of components. You don't need all that stuff. You don't need to be heating. You know, put the soil in a larger pot, put radiant floor heating, and the plants seem to tolerate the colder temperatures if the root zone's happy. You know. But this like fast-paced production model that's making its way into the commercial greenhouse with these little bitty pots, like, you know, nature doesn't make small ecosystems because small ecosystems are volatile. And so if you make a more hospitable home, it seems to buffer it, and the plants seem to tolerate a significantly higher level of, you know, garbage if you can reduce the hostility. And so people are spending a tremendous money of electricity trying to cool greenhouses. You just got to let the air out the top so it's not hostile in there, and then the plants can tolerate slightly cooler root zones. You know, they can only tolerate so much hostility from so many angles. And
Yeah, so many angles is the key. Too many angles, and that's the thing, is that, you know, a lot of people also are trying to compare this to another nursery crop, let's say, you know, and nursery crops, they're growing for the homeowners to take home and transplant or whatever. Like, how people grow in nursery business and greenhouses isn't always how we want to translate it over to cannabis. I mean, we went and toured the biggest orchid facility in California, or I don't know if it was the United States or what, with Scott and I in the Salinas area a couple months ago, and they use tons of small little pots, but orchids grow a certain way. You know, that's how you can do that. You know, this is cannabis. We can't wash it off like an apple. We can't, you know, I mean, I guess you can microwave it and blanch it now and do some crazy shit, but I mean,
well, I give them a shower. I give plants a shower if I had to treat them with something. Or
well, you know, when you and I are about to roll a joint, I don't grab the nugget and, you know, take it like an apple on my shirt and go like this.
You know what?
You got me there. Okay, that's okay. Now you got me there.
Dang. But Eric's right about, you know, one thing that I don't think people are considering at all is distribution across wide spaces. And even if you're doing chemical, that's fine. But, you know, we're moving to these 40,000 square foot facilities. How evenly is your nutrient solution getting distributed across 16,000 5-gallon pots? You know, if you do beds instead of pots, you can, you know, reduce a 40,000 square foot building down to like 120 different beds. So from my perspective, you're looking at 120 different ecosystems growing plants versus 16,000 pots growing 16,000 plants. You know
what's really confusing though is how people are overwatering, but yet we can do aquaponics. We got something that never dries out, but yet we have cannabis farmers that water the shit out of everything, and all hell breaks loose. And going back to what you're saying, Scott, with chemicals or not, hydroponic or whatever, we have this new top feeding drip into the cocoa. The cocoa needs to dry out as fast as it can so we can keep putting more in or whatever. And at the end of the day, they don't have enough drying out there too, because you can actually overwater in a system like that, because I see a lot of people trying to fight the same disease and certain things, and they need more airflow and more of this to dry things out even faster. And I'm like, why can't we just cut back on the fucking water for a second? Like, how about trying that for a change?
That's what I was telling you earlier. I don't really overflow mine. I don't really have water on the floor till it starts to the middle of the hot part of the day. You know, I keep it very light at the beginning when it's cool and the sun's low, and when it gets really hot, I increase my events of watering, and I don't generally. I just give more events and let it water the bag or water the pot, and then, you know, when it needs it again, I water it again.
Well, yeah, we see a lot of wet floors. I mean, there's a lot of wet floors. There's a lot of wet floors out there that we run into. And there's also these reservoirs that catches the water, so it doesn't create a wet floor, but they're still trying to get that medium to dry out so that they can keep the solution running or something. And it just seems that the disease doesn't seem to go away. So is it bad cuttings and we're repeating the process? Is it overwatering, or both? You know what I mean?
I think it's cocoa.
The same facility owners that are worried about numbers aren't in a lot of situations. You have a lot of new square footage that needs to be filled with cannabis and needs to be filled with growers. So a lot of these facilities are bringing people from just regular agriculture, and some facilities are hiring young students, young people for $12, $15 an hour that have never grown cannabis at all, and they're responsible for watering a 40,000 square foot building, or fill in the blank on size. And so one of the issues that's systemic across the commercial facilities is overwatering. Like, everybody is just dumping water. I was at a facility the other day in one of the agricultural communities, and they had the regular agricultural workers in there, and they had 6 people watering all at the same time, and every single one of them was doing a substantially different water volume. One employee was given a 5-gallon 25 counts. One of them was giving them 3 counts. And you talk about variations across scale. That's a tremendous issue right now.
You know what's funny about that? We're on the big greenhouse scale and all that commercial cannabis growing and all, but you know what? We run across that with these guys that are just starting to grow. That's the number one problem all the time. Overloving the young plants, overwatering stuff. Can I get a nod from Mr. Green Jeans over there? I know he probably got something to say about that, but
that's
overwatering's funny you bring that up, because even on our big giant commercials, I mean, every day, I mean, you know how many times in 13 years I've been asked what's the proper pH? You know, I mean, I get questions about, you know, what's wrong with my plant? They put a seedling in a 5-gallon pot of hot fertilized soil and water the dog shit out of it, you know.
One of the indicators you can teach them that might help is the little fungus gnats that everybody battles. Fungus gnats lay their larvae in waterlogged conditions where anaerobic decomposition is happening. So those larvae need to feed on anaerobic bacteria. So all the people that are out there doing living soil or what have you, just put the little yellow sticky cards in the pot, and you'll actually see pockets of overwatering. Or if the gnat populations are increasing, you need to back the water off. That's one of the issues for sure.
You guys want to see a funny little, can you see this map? Is it hard to see?
Yeah, we can see it.
That's California.
Map of pink California.
Yeah, so everything in the pink is a banned county that doesn't allow commercial cultivation. We're not done with it yet. This is a work in progress, but the green is where you're allowed to grow commercial cannabis. And so basically there's a lot of stoners in California, and there's going to be a shortage of weed, I'm guessing, soon.
Well, you know what? That also shows me that's all the green is on the west side of the mountains, right? Or like it's on the north side near the beach, and then all the pink is more on the like just like in Oregon and all, where you got the high desert plain over the mountains. It snows there and it rains all the time on the coast. So that's where you come across all that humidity problems and stuff like that too, because of rain.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking how many places have put up these bans, and it's there's going to be a lot of responsibility for people to deal with all this. They just banned actually in Calaveras County, where it actually was a permitted county, and they just up and banned it, and so now there's 200 permitted grows in a county that just lost their shit.
That's what people don't understand either across the country. They say, oh, I can move to California and grow weed. Not everywhere. In Colorado, that you can go move into a town, buy a house, and if you didn't check it out first, it might be the town that voted you can't have no weed in that town, because just because the state said you can grow weed, medical weed or recreational weed, doesn't mean your county or township, because that's something we argue about. We have big debates about, because we're mad about it. But just because, I think that's where you were touching, is you're talking, there's legal marijuana, but no, not everywhere.
Well, I think what people...
Marty was in a legal place, but he had to move. He had to sell his house and move because his neighbor complained, because he had an aquaponic system outside and grew for his caregiver. He was a caregiver for all the people he was doing a caregiver. He's growing in his backyard. His neighbor complained he couldn't grow in the backyard anymore, so he couldn't supply meds to all the people that he'd been taking care of for years. I don't know if you realize that, why Marty's moving. All right, I give it to you,
That's
Scott.
terrible.
Yeah, well, if you watch shows in the last 6 months, you probably catch that a few times. But I see Scott wanted to say something. I'm sorry, I jumped in there. Stop, Marty.
No, I had the whole runaround. I mean, I was in Minnesota growing tomatoes when Washington kicked off legal, and I'm from Washington, so I was like, oh, I got to go home, So I packed up my shit, and I started in the medical thing. And I had a warehouse, and I kind of knew that they were gonna zone it all for recreational. So I got this warehouse that was all zoned for recreational, and sure enough, they were shutting medical down, which they said they weren't gonna do. So it was like one thing after another, right? And so I didn't have a recreational license because they only opened up the period for 30 days. We had 30 days to get a license in 2013 December. And I didn't get one of those, so I was trying to partner with somebody. So I have all these people coming into my warehouse, and And lo and behold, I'm shake hand deal with this guy, and he's like, well, let's just check out the city thing one more time. I know you said you had it dialed. And sure enough, we looked it up, and 2 days prior, they had changed it and de-zoned me. And so I had to like shut the whole warehouse down, move, you know, and then it was like to another place, bad relationship. And then me and my wife, you know, we were finally able to buy a farm, and yeah, it was all good with the county, and the neighbors threw a shit fit. And so we spent 6 months fighting them, and it was just like, oh my goodness, dude. Like, I've spent 2 years not growing weed, trying to be legal. And this fall was my first crop for 2 years. It was crazy.
Damn.
Yeah.
You're in the same thing as Marty was in. You're in the same situation Marty was in.
Yeah, well, California is about to have 100 people go, or hundreds of people go through exactly what you did, because I heard Yolo County's possibly going to do the same thing, but I don't know if they can. There's all the people who are suing the county and suing the supervisors and all this other shit. So, I mean, there's so many different little sections of shit shows going on. It's kind of funny.
The same methods that were used to take farming out of the small family farmer and put into conventional ag are being used on cannabis right now across all the regulated states. And
well,
you know,
we've seen that coming.
Yeah.
You know, if Marlboro owned all the cannabis seeds, then it would all, you know, they'd be legal. You know.
Yeah, but expensive and difficult to navigate regulations that change quickly. And so I'm not sure what type of resiliency is needed to make it through this, but know that it's a formula they've executed many times, and it's been happening in multiple states. And, you know,
I think it's going to be about, you know, and again, we've talked about these issues so much that I don't know what happened to Steve. but because I'm surprised he's not jumping in all over this.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Well, why don't you, because we always talk about how, see, this is one thing that bugs the crap out of us, is the fact that they make laws, like you said, and every time they have a vote to vote somebody in, they can push an agenda to change the bill or to change the law and wherever you live, right? So you spend all this money. Isn't that what we're talking about? You're spending all this money to buy land or build a greenhouse, and then your neighbor says he don't like it. And now, I think in the end, you know, unless they change the law, you can win that pretty much outright. But having to go through the time to wait, you're losing income, you got all this money invested, it really would suck.
Well, the thing is you have to answer questions, you know. So if you got to go through all these different ecology, where's the wetland on your property, and where are you going to get your water source? I had to drill a well. It just boom, 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 lawyer. You just pay, and your neighbors are sitting there going, huh? And you know you're going to win because you know that everything's all cool, but you still got to walk through all these steps once someone questions it. That was my situation, and it put me back. I ended up having to take an investor on because I spent my chunk, you know, fighting my neighbors.
That's a super common story. I think one of the beneficial things that is coming out of all this is protection to the waterlands in some of these mountain regions. You know, people have been using some really nasty chemicals in these mountain areas for a long time, and now the fish and game is going through and just, you know, knocking down doors. So I don't want to see anybody get raided, but there's a considerable consideration for how destructive this has been. And, you know, I feel like we're getting close to repeat the Dust Bowl again by planting cannabis all over the state of California. You know, we've got some serious considerations coming up that need to be talked about that people aren't, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I support legalization. It's really hard, and it's, you know, harder for you guys down in Northern California. They've been doing it forever. It's just such a change, but you know, I think it's better for the environment. There's going to be a lot of better things, but there's a lot of bullshit to get there, you know.
So, for sure, I've got a lot of friends that have lost everything this year, and it's, you know, I've got some people that are on suicide watch for a certain degree because this is so traumatic. You know, you have first, second, third generational family farmers that have been doing this forever. They've been relying on this, and you know, they played all the games this last year. They paid they paid for the water testing, they paid for the facility assessments, and now, like Calaveras, they're banning it. You know, that's, you know, a lot of people are going to be in real bad shape right now. It's going to be a mess.
Super hardcore.
I hope that they go back on that shit, man. So that did happen a little bit with us, you know. 6 months down the road or whatever, you know. Sorry.
And I've harped on this before. This is what happens when you push bullshit ass bills like 64. You know, don't push bad bills. I literally would. You know how I met Dennis Perone? Dennis Perone and I did lobbying together against Amendment 64. Okay, that's how that's the reason why I ended up knowing him enough to be at his house on New Year's. Okay, it's because you need legalization. Yes, we all want that, but you need legalization that's reasonable and isn't going to go turn around and cause this crap that we're causing. You need to have some level of local taxation ability, but beyond that, none of this ability to ban it. Some of this local control stuff has gone completely out of control. The state voted to allow it overwhelmingly. Enough. You know what I mean? You lost.
Yeah, not being able to give free medicine to patients, and I mean, some of the things that they created out of 64 are really like surprising in some ways, I guess, because yeah, I can't believe the 64 right now at the same time with Sessions coming out saying what he's saying. I mean, it's definitely got people freaking.
Our governor just gave a little speech, and he was saying that the ability for local jurisdiction to ban cannabis is actually inhibit, or it stops it from taking it in the court level all the way to the federal level. You know, like those if there was a county or a city that didn't want it hard enough, they could just sue the state and just take that all the way up until the federal level, and then it would be a huge problem. And he's like, that's never happened anywhere in legalization, and it's in part because every state has allowed for a local ban. It was an interesting perspective.
Well, here's the deal, though. How would that work in regards to the Rohraback-Farr memo, or Rohraback-Farr Act, which states that the federal government cannot spend a dime to prosecute anyone following state law. So, if they were following state law and fighting that case, would that then be prevented in federal court because of the Rohraback-Farr Act, at least for another 72 hours?
You're right. I don't know. If you get a chance, you should check it out. He gave a speech at I think it was the Cannabis Alliance summit or something. But as our attorney general, and he basically was like, we're down to stand up against this motherfucker. It was cool.
Yeah,
well, Sessions is again standing against everybody now. So
yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I'd love to. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? That was my understanding, is that yes, they could investigate it, but they can't actually spend a dime to prosecute you, meaning they couldn't take you to court. They couldn't, in theory, really investigate you.
Well, the point is going to be, they have to reenact that bill at the next budget meeting, because that's all.
Well, I think one of the scarier things to me was the fact that the state attorney for Northern California resigned.
Yeah, that was definitely a clutch.
I wouldn't like that in California. Then that sounds.
And was replaced by a Sessions. Well, I guess they can't technically appoint him yet because what's his name is going to block him, but they're trying to replace him immediately, or they have replaced him, something like that. Anyways, Sessions is trying to replace him right now, so I got to double check.
It's funny that he's going to come after California. He's got bigger fish to fry. Once Massachusetts, Boston, and New Jersey, and Michigan, and Maine. He's pretty much going to be. He can go after California and waste all that, wasting our money when we got bigger fish to fry. And I think that's why people are so. That's why we're reading headlines about he's fighting like he's going to go down with the ship. And it's just sooner or later. So. I feel bad for all you guys out there in big farms worrying right now, but he's not going to do shit. He might replace a couple of people, and I would be worried about that. You just mentioned about political offices people being fired and replaced, but they're not going to. If Republicans are fighting against him, the Democrats are going to vote against him. So if you got any Republicans, you're going to win because it's that close. So I wouldn't worry so much about it. It's something good to debate about, but it's too late.
They're projecting cannabis to exceed almonds by a factor of 2 or 3, and almonds is the current agricultural commodity that brings in the most money into California. So, you know, if you think they're going to open up, if you think they're going to open that up to everybody, it's a bit naive, you know. So there's going to at least be some hurdles and difficulty and adversity to be able to maintain an opportunity to collect some of that gold, and so, you know, it's not going to be easy.
I agree.
Well, it's going to affect the banking quite a bit because, I mean, a lot of people I met this year in 2017 was already having problems with banking. I mean, we lost our bank account 3 or 4 times. And we're not even we don't sell weed. And they, nowadays we've been in business going on 12 years. And now just this year in 17 and now 18, when I say I work for Forever Flowering, they go, "Is that a cannabis company?" And I'm just like, man, like, so, I mean, it's been really hard with the banks just because the banks are so scared to touch anybody that even supports the industry. So, I mean, they have special forms now to fill out when you apply for a bank account for your business. You don't dare apply for a small business loan because then they really do some background checks. You can't have anything in your business's name to say, even if you're a safe company and you called yourself Cannabis Safes, you can't, that cannabis word is going to shut you down. So, I mean, it's the whole banking system or loans and all that shit that's really going to be effective right off the bat.
Well, that is a good point because if you can't, I mean, we all know that if anybody's followed it, that anywhere that cannabis businesses are, the banks have shut them down, and you have to hold all your money. You bring it up. We have a panelist that hadn't been on in a while because he's been going back to college. But Aquaponic Dumme has a fish business in Maine, and in a grow store with like a hydro store. And the 2 women from the bank came down and started looking at his place one day and asked him if they could grow cannabis with the equipment he sold. And he told them, well, he didn't have any control over that. 2 weeks later, he got a letter from the bank saying they could no longer have an account. He could no longer have an account in a small bumfuck Van Buren, Maine. It's where like there's nobody lives there but potato farmers. And,
yeah, well, they're doing that right in the heart of fucking Humboldt now, or you know what I mean. So I mean, it's getting ugly.
Wow. But this bank goes, it's sad though, because it's dangerous. For one thing, they're taking your money. The state's taking your money. We need to go help. You know what? Somebody needs. There's a lot of money in this industry. Somebody needs to start state banks again. They used to have state banks that didn't enter the federal banking system.
Bitcoin hits all new highs.
Yeah, well, and we'll get China to fucking write the insurance for it, because that'll piss them off. That'll piss off the government. We'll start state banking from state to state.
I think that they're going to come after blockchain. I think that that's just begging for federal prosecution, in my opinion, long term. I do think that it is nice to see that the California working towards that and a couple other states. My thing that terrifies me is that you have all these cannabis businesses that put all their money into this bank, and the federal government decides that they're going to be, assholes, and comes in and boop, and pulls everyone's money at once. And that's the reason why when they had a bank that they got real close to establishing in Colorado, they simply couldn't get that many people to sign up for it. Because I lived there. We went through all that.
Well, if you look at the way they did it in Calaveras, they took whatever it was, 10 grand per permit or whatever, and people that had to go to the county recorder's office had to bring cash. So here we are getting the banks telling us that people are buying $1,000 little hoop house or some greenhouse parts, and the bank shits because we bring a couple $1,000s in cash. They don't want cash. They want you to bring a check or wire transfer or some other bullshit. And yet the county recorder's office is taking cash for the permits, and it's way over the $10,000. And it's just like,
probably
okay.
won't let you write a check half the time either.
And then they ban it. So it's like, well, fuck it. They got their shit anyway, Like, I mean, it's pretty sick.
We're just barking up the same old tree, but it's fun with different people.
I'd be so furious if someone took 10 grand from me and then was like, yeah, no, you can't have a permit. This is so bullshit.
Yeah, the year before they actually gave somebody permits, and the person went to process all of it and, brought the 3 farms to one processing facility to trim it. Not, processing is kind of a blanket term now, because when you say processing, people go, well, you're extracting it, you're, edible, you're doing something
You're
with it.
meth.
And yeah, and if you're processing it, in some cases, you're just trying to dry it and trim it, in my opinion, and put it in a bag so you can store it or sell it. But nevertheless, this farm in Calaveras brought 3 of its farms into one place that was all permitted, and the sheriff came in and said, I didn't give you a permit to process it. And so they cleaned them out, $10 million in product or something, biggest bust around. But, it's like, okay, so I had a permit to grow it, but I didn't have a permit to pick it.
That's the first I ever heard that one. That's a good one. Yeah, that's a real good one.
Yeah,
that goes way to the root. I mean, that's right down to the roots. You're screwed right there.
Well, the sheriff runs the show. A lot of people think it's the supervisors and a lot of other people, but I mean, ultimately, it's up to the sheriff, and the supervisors will follow whatever the sheriff decides. And so, I mean, it's kind of like Mayberry when you really look at it.
That's where I live. I live in a town where if the sheriff goes to church and say it's going to be this way, that's how it's going to be.
Yeah, well, when you get down to it and you literally look at these laws and these cannabis wars, it's not that simple, but when you really pull it apart, it kind of is. The sheriff gets what he wants, and if he says, fuck it, we go.
His whole family, the sheriff is married to the mayor's daughter, and if they go to church and say this is going to happen, that's what's going to happen in this town.
Oh, shit. That's small town.
Yeah, well, I live outside big town about a mile down. But, I mean, I'm just saying, yeah, I understand. I mean, at the very smallest, core, we get, hey, when we go to traffic court here, the police force are in riot gear. Bunch of damn farmers and churchgoers. They're afraid they're going to be so fucked up. They're afraid we're going to go in there and blow their shit away and take over the town or something, We got a lake right down the street 5 miles from me, and we can't ever have any business or any fun out there because there's only one way in and one way out, so nobody can go party because then you got the local police force stopping everybody, and so nobody will even open a business in this town. If they do, it's like antique business or I'll just leave it at that, because other things would probably offend somebody. If I
no Hooters?
No, it wasn't even, no, shit. You couldn't have a Hooters here. It'd be the only Hooters that had absolutely no clientele inside.
Hey, Roger.
Nobody go there.
Hey, Roger.
They get.
Hey, you're an older dude that's been hanging on the forums for a long time. How would you say, like, how has it changed from your perspective watching the new growers come through over the last however many years you've involved? Like, how's that changed? Are the people asking the same exact questions they asked 12 years ago, or?
Well.
Are they dumber now? I feel like they're dumb.
No. In my case, I'm trying to train. I got a really great community that my moderators and everybody have, we're all on the same page. But I'll tell you what I've noticed more than anything. My largest new member, I would say, is 50 to 65 years old. So.
Well, that makes sense. The funny thing, I just talked to somebody in California with their recreational shop that just opened up, and they said that between 1 and 3 o'clock is ladies that are over 60 come all in. All the older ladies come in and look at weed and buy weed for a couple hours. And then he said after 5 o'clock, it's all the county workers and the permitting people and the fucking licensing people that they've been dealing with all this time now are coming in to buy their weed and shit. So, I mean, it's kind of funny to see the evolution of cannabis and all the people that, you didn't think were going to come through those doors are coming through those doors.
Well, one of the things was we touched on earlier when I said we're a no bullshit forum. We're a learning environment. We want to have fun too. I've done a lot of things on the forum, contests. We give away free genetics every month in the Bud of the Month contest. I had a 12 Days of Christmas. I gave out several prizes, gift cards to the seed bank, and we sell other stuff, CBD oil and some other stuff. But allegedly,
didn't you say you were the genetics man? What's your favorite genetics?
Well, all my genetics come out of Amsterdam.
Tell me about them. What do you like rocking right now? What's popular?
Well, shoot, everybody loves the Super Silver Haze. Everybody loves it. Well, we've got our own strain, which is over 25% CBD and over 25% THC, which is called Gold Leaf. Our owner developed his own strain, concentrating on the ultimate high-level medical marijuana strain with a high CBD and THC level, which we all know that you have to have some THC to get all the molecules available to the body, so in layman's terms, and I won't go on that. That's more of a Tommy thing or a Steve thing, but the point is we proved that CBD alone won't give the ultimate pain relief like with a little bit of THC, but all right. So Gold Leaf, I like. We've got real blueberry. We got cheese, which was a Cannabis Cup winner like 4 or 5 years ago, or maybe 8 years ago. I don't know. In Amsterdam, the Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam, cheese. We got that, the original cheese. We've got blueberry. We've got a straight indica, a straight sativa. I've got an amnesia haze, purple haze, super silver haze, super skunk. We got autoflowers and all kinds of stuff like that. I like the strawberry Kush is one of my favorites. And the fruity pack that we sell has pineapple haze, which is a true blueberry, a derivative off of the big debate of DJ Short and blueberry and all about Dutch passion seeds and all that. Well, that it's kind of like it's the real blueberry, and we have OG Kush, but I like the fruity pack. That's what I've been doing, along with Blue Dream, which is I did it because everybody said they loved it, and then we had a big funny laugh because joke between me and Marty and Steve, we talked about it being so easy to grow and a big yielder, and like everybody grew it kind of thing. But I was a late comer because when it's gifted to me, I wanted to go. We have Jack Herrera, for instance. I like to get that shit like that. Oh, they got Jack Herrera, like if and everything we have pops in 1 to 2 days. They go, and we guarantee every seed, whether you screw it up or it doesn't show up, we take care of it and you get your seeds. If you take a 5-pack and kill them all, we'll send you another 5-pack. Now, not 15 times, but because we figure by the first time you better get lessons from us on the forum and make sure you get your seeds. But and we probably replace them again, maybe. Again, I don't want to go saying we're going to go exponentially replacing seeds, but if your seeds don't show up, we replace them. We have 100% backup and all that. So, and like I said, I've been gifted seeds from Canada to England and all over Europe for like 10 or 12 years or 10 years. And then I went to work for ilovegrowingmarijuana.com. And I've never had genetics that grew plants like I've got now. I mean, you can't kill them. I do things to screw them up on purpose to teach the guys, even though it hurts me a little bit. I make sure that when I say something, I know exactly what, so I tested the Gold Leaf, for instance. I water stressed it in seedling stage. I water stressed it in veg. I water stressed it in flower. I couldn't kill that son of a bitch. I grew 2 plants with some Botanicare nutrients and got 1.5 pounds under a 600-watt light.
I saw a commercial.
I
saw a commercial facility do an accidental open pollination with a mislabeling one time. That was pretty dope.
Yeah, I mean that's the way you do. If you want to teach, though, that's kind of weird. That sounds weird to me. I don't even. My favorite was a guy running a room. It was at least 100 by 40, like room, big giant room, and he had spider mites. So he went and he sprayed for spider mites for like 3 weeks. Didn't remove any damage to know if there was any new damage. And then proceeded to act as if nothing happened, and then getting close to flower, the whole room's infested again, and it was like, well, you're fired.
There's a systemic issue of not understanding how the pests work, and we need more information on life cycles of pests and how to disrupt them. And one of the biggest issues of why the pest persists is because we're not disrupting the life cycle to properly remove the pest. And using a strategy that kills the adults and then following up with something that suffocates the eggs, and then coordinating those dates with the life cycle of the plant. And there's some research that shows certain pesticides actually shorten the time it takes for some of these pests to reproduce. So you go in and you spray these pests, and then they produce some offspring, and then you've also modified them genetically to produce faster. And so all these things come into account, and people just go in every Sunday and spray, but really you got to kill the adults on contact. A couple days later, kill the eggs that you just created, and then any adults that survive that process, again, something that kills on contact, anything from essential oils to whatever, but you know, something that actually will kill adults, and then you have to suffocate the eggs. Yeah,
that's a great point. I mean, what is it, like the hormones, some of the DNA that, because RNA, DNA, or hormone, what is it that's causing that to speed up the process of the regeneration of, you know, the species?
I read the book, but I'll be honest, the book's kind of difficult to understand. I enjoy reading really difficult science. So if anybody out there is super nerdy and really good at reading comprehension, you should get this book, Healthy Crops. If my wife will throw it to me, I'll hold it up in front of the picture. But essentially, it's here we go. Boom, Healthy Crops.
Put a link in the chat too, Scott. If
yeah, I don't know. There it goes. Healthy Crops. But essentially, it was a French research scientist that compiled a ton of other research from back as old as the 30s to the 50s, quantifying changes in physiology in the plant through pesticide sprays and whatnot. And I think it was DDT. It's really old research, so it's old chemicals they're talking about, and not necessarily cannabis related. But it's important to note that there is scientific research that shows the reproductive rates increased in certain pests of agriculture. So, but the book is written by a French guy and it's translated, so it's just really dry and repetitive. But you know, you hear this term in when they regard pests. Resistance is the term they like to use. You know, the pests are developing a resistance to the pesticides, or the fungal pathogen is creating a resistance to the fungicide. But there's research back, you know, pre-1960 that shows it's actually proliferation, which is considerably different than resistance. And so some of these pesticides actually increase the reproductive rate and increase the number of eggs that are produced, increasing bugs. It's not becoming tolerant to the pesticide. You're actually feeding them more by changing the physiology of the plant. Some of these pesticides start what's called protein breakdown. In the book, they call it proteolysis, I think is the word. So there's only two directions. The plant is either correctly building proteins, so you're having protein synthesis, or proteins are breaking down and you have proteolysis. And some of these pesticides induce this protein breakdown phenomenon. Those proteins that are breaking down is actually what becomes food for the pest. So in trying to spray the pest, you might kill some adults on contact, but you've now changed the physiology of the plant to feed them better and faster, something along those lines. So if somebody out there is really good with dry science, we need more people to comprehend this book. I've read through it a couple times. I've had it for about 3 years, and I just barely forced myself to sit down and finish it this last week. You know, it just shows over and over and over and over again that these pesticides are not helping, you know, and they're changing the physiology of the plant to make them more susceptible to pests. So
they're killing beneficial bugs and insects too.
Yeah, that's one of the theories.
On the bees and the almond thing, which I'd like to address, but I want you to go on. Yeah.
No, good. That's one of the things that's one of the theories that that what's happening is it's disrupting the populations of what would normally eat the pests, and that's partially that is an effect. But this book goes into that. There's a whole chapter on that concept. I don't remember well enough to try and regurgitate it live on YouTube, but they do have a chapter. They do have a chapter that covers it well. But more importantly, what happens is you disrupt the natural balance of what they call species survival. So when we talk about fungi, for example, beneficial fungi that break down carbon in the forest take 12 hours to 24 hours to even start the reproduction process. Their disease competitors, water molds, multiply you know, on an order of 20 to 40 minutes. And so when you have a competition, so if you walk into a building and you spray a fungicide, that wipes it down to 0. That's baseline. And the disease-causing organisms or the pests in nature reproduce faster than the beneficial things, because that's how nature keeps things in check. Because typically in a natural system, you know, a spider mite needs to lay hundreds of eggs. A ladybug lays 2 or 3, because the ladybug has a higher species survival rate. So when you go in and you spray everything, whether it's for trying to kill fungus or it's trying to kill pests, you start at, you know, time clock 0, and then all the bad things start reproducing quicker than the good things. And so there definitely is a disruption in ecosystem and predator-prey interactions. And I don't think people have any reference for that. You know, there's a tremendous gap between who's growing our plants and the scientists that are doing the research. And then there's a tremendous effort to block some of this research for some of the people that are growing our plants. And, you know, then we get stuck on YouTube for another 2 hours digging into that fucking wormhole. But
you think it might be the fact that the companies that could develop something might be holding back? If we keep buying all this other crap that doesn't work, they make more money. If they actually made something that work, it'd become cheap and they wouldn't make any money. We'd all copy it or be able to figure out an organic way to do it or something. I mean,
yeah, I can tell you that at the commercial scale, when you're doing a proper living soil, the nutrient input cost is 1/5 that of bottles. You know, so some numbers that I've seen on commercial scale, like an average full fertility bottle routine. So somebody running like all the heavy 16 line, or even mixing your own salts. You know, most of the bottled people are somewhere between $2 and $3 per square foot of canopy per harvest cycle. The people that are doing living soil properly are down below 50 cents a square foot. If you get the soil balance really well and you got your shit together, we've got a couple people that are down below 20 cents a square foot. So if your neighbor is spending $3 a square foot to fight pests and you're spending 17 cents a square foot to have no pests, that's a tremendous market advantage from my perspective. So not only that, you're just, you know, sometimes growing better plants, but you're exactly right. Like, the people that are selling stuff want to continue selling stuff. So problems are profitable, and we're going to perpetuate problems so we can perpetuate profits.
Right, because if there's not a problem, they can't sell you something to fix it. And, you know, even if it's poisonous to the country and the water, and, you know, whatever.
There's a new fun one I heard this week where pesticide and chemical companies get rid of other pesticides by putting them into bottles of products off label, and they label them additional ingredients or inactive ingredients. And there's a thing that I say at my conferences is to test every product going in your facility, because of these issues with people failing tests for products that are not on the labels of any bottles they're using. And turns out that these chemical companies put little drops of trash into the pesticide stream as a way to dump it. So there's a lot of wildness going on.
I'm good. That's good for everybody to know too, because, you know, we talk about stuff, but see, you're getting down to the root level of what these people are actually willing to do just to not lose a few bucks. They don't care about the environment or the water or your plants or what you put into your body or what cancer it causes, because they've spent money on it, research and development, and now they got to get rid of it somehow. So they dilute a quality product with crap. You know.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is it's cannabis that's cleaning up all this shit. You know, it's like the average organic farmer that grows carrots is not concentrating their product and sending it off for a $500 pesticide panel. You know, and so these cannabis facilities are having crop loss when the state agent notifies you that you failed the test, and they come confiscate and destroy your material. That's a tremendous motivation to figure out the cause. And there's also a tremendous financial benefit to being good at this game. And so the testing that's going on in cannabis is remarkable. And, you know, that's one of the things I'm sure when I'm an old man, I'll just be mind blown at what these last 2 years have brought to me and how's that paved the way. You know, earlier in the year, we worked with 6,000 acres of conventional agriculture. You know, we do both sometimes, but, you know, we go out and we spend 2 weeks treating a tremendous amount of acreage growing vegetables, and then we leave, and then they just let us know how it goes at the end of the season. But when we're working some of these light depth facilities that are bringing in new plants each week, we're testing, monitoring, changing, adjusting, quantifying and analyzing each week. And so, you know, in the spring, I went out and helped dose some biology onto some corn, and I got one data point back that the weather was shitty and the corn didn't do well. And you know, in the time it took for the corn to have weather problems, you know, we had 187 data points on cannabis, and each year we're getting, you know, 3 to 4 to 5, sometimes 6 harvests in a calendar year, where agriculture is doing the same old thing year after year after year. And so by interacting in this high pace commercial model that's going on right now, the amount of analysis that's going on, you know, we're 50 to 100 years ahead of the average vegetable farmer out there, because of the amount that we're allowed to, you know, quantify, attempt, change, and move forward with. So, you know, shout out to all the light depth people out there and commercial facilities that are hitting the gas pedal hard, and they're using science to their advantage to get better at their craft. And, you know, just super thankful to be a part of that process.
Yeah, I like the fact that there's something you said. I was across the room at the time, but yeah, it goes back to what you said earlier about maybe what we're doing now is going to allow the government to do something positive and really chopping down on, or, you know, clamping down on the water qualities and stuff like that.
Well, just wait till Salinas starts pulling harvest down. They're doing no plant canopy limit. Or last I checked, a lot's changed in the last 2 weeks, but like in the Salinas Valley, that's the most toxic ass place on the planet, producing all our food, but nobody talks about it. And, you know, you get a bunch of money coming in from wherever, throwing up 34,000 plants in a house, 6 houses on a property, and the neighbor's crop dusting them with who knows what. And all that stuff's getting sucked into the intake fans. Like, that's when all this stuff is going to get ugly, you know? And when people start losing a tremendous amount of money in these old cut flower houses that had really low profit margins, you know, it's going to get serious.
You're going to see that in the Central Valley too. You see all these people thinking that they're getting cheap land out in the Central Valley and stuff, and you have all this wind blow off because you're surrounded by, you know, hundreds of square miles of just stuff sprayed with some stuff that there's no regulation. And, you know, you see this all the time. I mean, I know you judged it at or spoke at Emerald Cup. I mean, I'm sure at Emerald Cup all the time you get people that fail, not because that they didn't do anything, but because they had, you know, something 3-4 doors down that, you know, some asshole that sprayed something that, you know, just happened to fail them. Especially with concentrates, it really kicks you in the ass.
Yeah, this is all the fun. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry, but they were finding a lot of trim passing. The concentrators are finding trim passing, but when they concentrate it, it fails. So it's really hard for a couple of the extractors that I met to go out and buy material because it tests clean until they concentrate it.
Yeah, I know we had to switch to moving to do 8 ounce, 4 ounce, 8 ounce, or 1 pound runs of people's stuff before we do big batches, just because it's not worth the time for me to go clean the big machine. I can spend, you know, half an hour to an hour cleaning the little machine, do a half quick test run, send it out real quick, and know if you're lying to me or not. You know, you just right now you can't trust anybody, and the liability it just, you know, so my whole lab's shut down for hours if it's dirty. You know, you just cost me
totally makes sense.
a lot of money.
That would suck.
Well, now you're bringing up considerations of cross-contaminating clean material. You know, there's so many issues that we didn't even know was an issue that's becoming a very significant issue now that we're analyzing it, and, you know.
Yep, and people don't think of this kind of stuff, but, you know, it's the little kind of stuff that you have to do now at the point we are in the market. Otherwise, you know, how are you supposed to know it all? You know, you'll just get completely screwed. You know, I could have, you know, say I didn't check that, and I did a run 3 or 4, I could contaminate other producer's crop. Now I'm in the pocket for him, and you know what I mean, and I'm out the money, and I'm out the time for the you know, the lab is down. So now I'm out, you know, basically 3 times. You know, it's the reason why we have to do that kind of stuff. You have to take every measure to kind of cover your ass now in this market.
Yeah, there's
Eric, you muted.
Oh, whoops.
You're
Sorry.
muted. There you
There I am. There's a pesticide active ingredients reported in each county ranked during 2015, and let's see, Monterey County ranked 6th in the state for pesticide and for pesticide use for a pounds applied. Number 1 was Fresno County, which is a banned area, but Monterey County, for that matter, was number 7. And if you look at like Stanislaus, let's see what Stanislaus was. I don't know if they have that on here. No. Trinity County was 53. That's up in the Emerald Triangle. Let's see what was. Let's see if they have Humboldt on here. Humboldt was ranked 51. So you can see where the drift is going to be in certain counties if you just look at the pounds used per year.
Yep, the closer you are to the Cali Ag Belt. That's the other thing with it's the other problem with like Coachella Valley, you know. Aside from the brutal heat, you're going to have, you know, to a certain extent that blow off from the Central Valley, the Imperial Valley. You're going to get, you know, those winds definitely come up from the south on a regular basis. I used to live down there.
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
you're
Kern
gonna get
County's
some wind.
2. Kern County's 2nd to that, and let's see. Imperial's right at the border. That is, dang, that's not on this list, but that's definitely a lot of. Oh yeah, Imperial's 11. Imperial's 11.
They use a lot down there, man.
Man, that sounds like a whirlwind of shit. Maybe I'm glad I don't live over there in California.
So this is stuff that you're going to see come back and bite the industry in the ass. I mean,
Lake County's at 33, ranked 33, because Lake County has a lot of grapes. So we got a lot of, I'm sure, a lot of Eagle 20 in the Lake County area.
The thing that's mind blowing from my perspective in California is, I mean, at least Southern California is insanely dirty with chemicals, and people just use, you know, like abamectin and imidacloprid and myclobutanol and, you know, the Bayers and the Avids and the Eagle 20s, and they just have that in the system like it's part of the program, and they're just going to jump into regulation, you know. So even if you get the water board happy and you pay the fines and you set your property and you get everything chosen, you know, most of these guys have built a system on toxic chemicals that have extremely low detection limits next year, and you know, I don't know what's going to happen with that, but.
Santa Barbara is ranked 12.
Nice.
No, what I think they do need to do is they need to do a phase-in, kind of like, I don't know if you guys went through Colorado, but Colorado did a phase-in where it was like every 3 to 6 months. It gave people, dispensaries, a chance to get used to it. Obviously, they cut out the dangerous stuff, but it gave you a chance to update your SOPs, train your guys. There wasn't just this overnight, okay, now you need to suddenly train, you know, 65 guys or, you know, 35 guys, or because when you're running a crew, man, that's, you know, I understand the safety issue, but, you know, guys, that's a lot of time that I simply can't do that in 24 hours. Just a logistics thing. So that's the reason why I thought that Colorado handled it by doing a 2 to, I forget what the phase-in was. I think it was a 3 or 6 month phase-in, but it made a lot more sense where they gave everyone a heads up. This is what the new laws are going to be. This is the stuff that won't be allowed. You know, and here's the phase-in, and, you know, and it made so much more sense. It was so much more gentle on the industry, and it really made it, you know, much easier for both halves of the coin, I think.
Well, that's generally what they do with new laws, but not necessarily in agriculture. But it's a shame. But that sounds like any other law. Well, we're going to do this for taxes, or we're going to do this. They say, but it's ways down the road, and it gave everybody a chance to prepare for the change. Problem, yeah, I think you got too much stuff otherwise coming out at the last minute, and then people adapt to it and spend a bunch of money, and then they get no assistance from the bank in the cannabis industry, and then all of a sudden they change the law again.
All right.
In agriculture business, I grew for Whole Foods, habaneros and poblanos and stuff, and they'd go, oh, we want clamshells. So I'd get a bunch of shitload of box cases of clamshells, and they got like a season, and then they go, "Oh, we don't want clamshells; they're not selling. We want people to be able to pick out 2 habaneros and buy it. So we need you to sell us a half bushel again, you know." But they were paying me. They were paying me like $30 for a half bushel of habaneros, and $28 for like 12 clamshells that had 3 ounces each in them. You know, so I was selling like 2 or 3 pounds for $30 or 18. No, it's 30. 12 clamshells were $18, and 30-pound half bushel was $30. And they wanted me, after I spent all that investment, it's the same old thing. They change. They get you going one way, then they want to do another thing. Yeah, I see you smiling over there.
Yep.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. You're in the greenhouse. You know what I'm talking about.
Did you guys have anything else here? Or we're getting her up to 9 o'clock here. We usually start to wrap the show up. I know it's been on for a little while, so I appreciate everyone coming on. Do you guys want to tell everybody how to find you, and then I'll mention the thing here at the end. You want to go first, Eric? You're on mute still.
Whoops. I put some stuff over here in the chat, the link to the tickets, and I put our website, but it's lightdep.com. My Instagram is all one word, at Forever Flowering Greenhouses. And I believe my email's up there. It's eric@foreverflowering.net, ERIC. And we are in Grass Valley, California, 1 hour away from Sacramento. So if anybody wants to fly in and make the trip up, we're not too far from Lake Tahoe. We're not too far from the Bay Area. And yeah, it could be a worthy trip if anybody wants to come check it out and see the greenhouses. Otherwise, I'll be up in Portland with Scott at the event. And I appreciate everybody for having me on. This is probably the funnest podcast I've ever done.
Thanks. Yeah, we try to have fun here, and we try to just bring people on, let them talk about what they know about, what they're passionate about, and kind of see where it goes, unless there's a particular topic that week. But yeah, we find it works out best when we get it really cool perspectives on topics that you wouldn't normally get by just trying to force a particular thing, you know.
Yeah, man. Thanks again.
It was a blast listening to you, man. It was hearing what you say.
Cool. It's great meeting all you guys too.
That I need to look at, you know.
Yeah, well, email me, Roger. I'd love to talk to you again or correspond with you more.
Yeah, I'm legally blind, so if you don't mind, I'd like y'all either hook up. We'll figure out a way to do Skype, or I've got another conference call that's cheap and free. But yeah, we could email. Email to me is a little tougher because, you know, what are you laughing about?
Well, Scott's over there holding the sign up, trying to get. I don't know if he can use the chat thing.
Let's Scott.
I was practicing.
Scott's gotta go. Scott's gotta go. Let's do Scott.
He's got a family.
Scott.
I didn't mean to be distracting. I was practicing. You know, I don't know. I just come from a different era of paranoia, and so I picked a business name that was hard to find. I don't advertise, so every time I try to say my website, it just is confusing because it's hard to spell. But that was by design. But
fair enough. Not everybody wants to build their business online.
I think the best way to find me is at the convention in Portland. We've been doing the convention circuit, but it's getting pretty volatile out there. The more I speak about the truth, the more people get upset with me. And every time I do a workshop, there's a sensitivity meeting after, and people want to talk to me about what I said and this, that, and the third. And so I'm probably going to give it one bass blowout and go back into my cave for a while. So if you've been casually thinking about hanging out with me, you probably want to catch me up in Portland. I'll be speaking on Friday for 2 hours, I believe, around the 2 p.m. time. And then at 7 p.m., Eric and I will be doing a Q&A with a couple other late additions. I think Joshua Steenland, who's great on Instagram. I'm not sure who else is going to be joining, but I think the real value is going to be the Q&A after, and then we'll be available until we get tired to just shoot the shit. So I'm really good in person and answer a lot of questions as if it was consulting, just because people really need to be connected with some answers. And then my email is Scott, SCOTT, at cressivesoil.com, CRESCIVESOIL.com. I don't know if you can see that.
Yep, and we also have it in the description and the video too.
Yeah, and I'm Scott Tola Granola on Instagram, but I'm getting kind of tired of that shit show, so I don't know how much longer I'll be on there. It's like people, if I try to like distill like one terp of what goes on in the private messages and splash it on the public world, everybody loses their fucking mind, And so it's like I get the same questions over and over and over and over again for years about mold and russet mites, and it's like, people put a beautiful picture of their garden and they email me about how to get rid of russet mites. So I don't know. This shit's getting old, but Scott Tola Granola on there. A couple more workshops coming up, and I'm gonna go back in a hole for 2018.
I found out when I got away from it, it drove me. Well, I was good for about 6 months to a year, and that was about it. It was driving me crazy, not to be involved. I mean, that you get to it until you got. Well, what am I gonna do? Well, I love teaching people how to grow. Maybe I'll go look at a forum and. And I got lucky because I found I got lucky and have a job at it. So I understand that though. I know a lot of people like you that they really do want to, we got other people that come on the show that really do not want to put out all their information out there as much as the rest of us, and for good reason. Well, and I can see why you've got that, but I'd like to talk to you too. Cause I don't know. I know you guys are doing it all because of the cannabis industry, but I think the same kind of thoughts that you're going into that, into testing and the regulations, could be to the agriculture across the country. See, not just where you're at, but again, you may or may not be just want to limit it to cannabis, But
I think it's
shut up, Steve.
I think it's super important to connect and have community. I think that's not what I'm upset about. What I'm upset about is the vast difference between the reality of what is and what you're allowed to talk about publicly. That's tremendously gap. And, I'm not one to sugarcoat shit. And I've been, really holding it back because the public just doesn't want to hear the truth. And so I'm not sure where the truth is allowed to be told or where people are really doing that. But, social media is really fake right now. Nobody notices that.
You're in good company here.
People don't notice that, Instagram pops off, gets a bunch of fake followers on some program, takes a picture of a bunch of vegetative plants in a giant greenhouse. They hashtag innovation, and nobody noticed that they never pull a harvest out of there. Like, they don't follow up with flower pics. You know what I mean? It's all just like posterizing and brand bullshitting. And, the reality is that russet mites and broad mites are a tremendous problem because of practices and processes and ingredients. And we need a place where people can openly commune about actual solutions without brands and garden centers getting their feelings hurt, because we are at a critical point. We're at a critical point where the average age of the farmer is 62 and his kids are accountants because farming isn't profitable. And so who's going to grow our food? We need to connect with community. And so people can learn how to grow food, because we're heading into a critical point in human history where we're all going to die because we don't know how to grow shit. So,
and that's a damn true fact. All the farmers, there's a big thing like go to FAA, all that stuff. Yeah, not FAA. I can't. But you're right. The farmers are in seniors. All the farmers are seniors. I do see a lot of people getting into agriculture that are very young. So I think that's going to change. But they're so young that we're not able to really count them in a consensus. Or a census, but I don't know, I would think somebody like maybe Eric would have something, being does stuff at a university where he has more idea about that. But don't you think that I know for a fact that is right, and that's a sad thing. All the farmers are 60 years old.
But I think
their kids don't want to grow. They don't want to be on the farm because you can't make a dime. You're trying to figure out how to do a little bit more or do a way to make your produce worth more. And they're always screwing you. I mean, I'm hydroponic. They want to sell me at prices of conventional. Yet somebody organic, supposedly, gets a bigger rate of for their produce, although mine would pass any test and purity test and quality test and no disease. But I will never get any more money than what a guy with a dirt farm has, and I'm not a complaint, and I think they're getting screwed too. Cause I mean, I got a greenhouse they got a freaking farm and have to have tractors and stuff, you know. So I think we're all getting screwed. All farmers are getting screwed. And I
think it's bringing about an opportunity. We have a tremendous amount of young cannabis farmers that are getting super interested in how to grow weed. And there's a million tent farmers out there that are very enthusiastically learning about how to grow a crop. And I think we're much closer to the point where we're going to need them to grow crops than not. And so I think, you know, guys like you that have been active with people on the forum and trying to give them some sort of information that's positive is, you know, sooner than later in the next handful of years is going to be extremely critical and extremely helpful. So, you know, I think it's important that we do find community somewhere. We just need community that allows realness, and that shit does not exist right now.
I promote farming both vegetables and cannabis, and so does Marty, and so does Steve, actually. And then their company they're building is gonna do both. You know, they're not just growing cannabis, they're gonna grow aquaponic produce also. And that's where I'm at, being self-substantial. And I believe you need it all, because like it's really cool when you get into aquaponics, you find out, like Marty goes, well, I put all this like lettuce or kale or whatever those California guys grow, they eat that green shit, you know, but he puts the stuff that draw nitrogen out of the fish, out of the fish water, the fish poop, whatever you want to call it, the regular reservoirs, the fish and what they provide. And it's mostly nitrogen. So they're already doing cannabis, and then in flower they add companion plants that take up nitrogen to take away nitrogen from the plants. You know, to lower the ppm in that.
All right,
we gotta go.
We gotta get wrapping up. Thanks, Mr. Green Jeans. Do you want to tell everybody how to find you, buddy?
Peace. I'm at greenjeansgarden.com. Thanks a lot, Eric and Scott. You guys were a lot of fun, man. It was really awesome. Thanks a lot for coming on, and and I'm sure I'm speaking for everybody. You were definitely much appreciated in here, and we agreed. Yep. I agreed with damn near everything you said. I'm not saying you're preaching to the choir or anything, but I think most of the panel here was right with you. But I'm sure a lot of listeners and other people should be aware of the things you're saying, especially when you're talking about stuff like organic gardening being considerably cheaper, organic methods being cheaper, easier, more efficient, things like that. You know, we need to hear more of that. Anyway, sorry. greenjeansgarden.com.
Awesome. And what about you, Roger?
Excellent. Well, I got, as I don't give out my farm name, but you can find me at IloveGrowingMarijuana.com, where we have the best genetics for Amsterdam and the most friendly forum on the W3. You will not get called down for asking a question here. You will have a good time and get some knowledge. We're a teaching forum first and foremost.
Yep. And remember to check out regenerativeorganiccannabis.com. And then the Eventbrite link that's also in the description for this to get tickets for this event coming up at the end of the month and in Portland. And, we'll have a great time. Also, we're going to have commercial classes, commercial aquaponic classes up at Ouroboros with Ken and Charlie Schultz, and I are going to be doing a multi-day class here. We're going to have dates announced here shortly, and we're also going to have an add-on day at the end for cannabis. So if you want to come up, it'll include a dinner at the farm, and we'll have some other cool stuff that we'll announce later that we're working on as well. So we'll have probably 2 or 3 of those this year. So the first one will be in March, and I'll have dates on that next show probably. So, all right, thanks everyone for watching, and take care. We'll see you guys next week. Cheers.
Scott, you were great, buddy.